Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight's story is titled, 7 Creepiest Graves Ever Discovered Across the U.S. We're heading to the quiet edges of the map, the forgotten fields, the abandoned churchyards, the woods where even the wind feels cautious. These are not legends. These are the graves people found when they weren't supposed to. The resting places that don't rest. The ones that watch from below. Every account in this video comes from someone who stood at these graves in person and walked away changed. Before we begin, I want to say this. Almost 90% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. If you're here, listening in the dark, wandering into these shadows with me, don't vanish like the others. Join the darkness. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments and where are you watching from, and what time of night is it. If there's a grave or cemetery in your town that genuinely unsettles you, type its name. Because the world may sleep, but the soil doesn't always stay still. Kill the lights, silence everything around you, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I'm not a writer. I'm a guy who drives a box on wheels from point A to point B and tries not to fall asleep doing it. If this sounds like a story, that's just because I've been telling it too many times in my head, trying to make it make sense. It still doesn't. I'm putting it down here because I don't want it sitting in me anymore. My name is David Rourke. I'm 41, recently divorced, no kids. I drive for a small outfit that moves heavy equipment to repair yards and job sites all over New England. A couple of years ago, late autumn, I took a run up to northern Maine, north of Bangor, past the places with proper names and into the map where everything's just numbered routes and little blue streams. It was one of those gray weeks where the clouds hang low and the rain isn't a downpour. Just a constant spit, like the sky is chewing tobacco and you're in front of it. The run was supposed to be easy. Haul a busted skidder to a repair yard tucked near an old logging town that the guy on dispatch called still alive if you squint. I left Bangor after lunch. The air cold enough to bite when I fueled up. The smell of wet pine everywhere. I took Route 9, the airline road. Long, narrow, shoulders soft with red dirt. Trees bunched up tight on both sides like they leaned in to talk about you. Every now and then the rain turned to mist and the crows on the power line sounded like they were laughing at the way my wipers squeaked. I didn't want the radio. I let it be quiet. It felt good after a week of motel televisions whispering and my own head buzzing with divorce paperwork and the kind of solitude that never relaxes. Only hums. Coffee in the thermos, heat on the floor. A damp wool smell from the coat on the passenger seat. I was grateful for all of it. The normal, the predictable, the road that stayed a road. Somewhere past a sign that said in peeling letters, Waltham 10, and then something smaller I didn't catch. The forest opened just a little, like a held breath. It was dusk, the color that lives between blue and black. On my right, set back maybe 10 yards from the asphalt, I saw a low mound of stones. River rock, smooth, round, wet like everything else, piled neat in a long oval, the size of a grave. You see cairns in places like that. Hikers stack rocks to say we were here. But this wasn't a stack. It was a cover. I wouldn't have thought much of it except it looked fresh. The stones were dark with new rain but clean of moss and lichen, and the ground around them, a clayish red, had that recently disturbed look. Clumpy and smeared like a child's attempt at frosting. I glanced at the shoulder to see if there was a pull-off, but it was just mud. The skidder on my trailer banged once as we hit a divot, and I kept moving because the light was going fast, and I don't stop a loaded rig if I don't have to. 10 minutes later, I passed a gas station that had the pump handles wrapped in garbage, bags and a hand-lettered sign on the door, cash only. A man sat on a stool inside, shoulders hunched, counting something. The bell didn't ring when I went in because there was no bell. The coffee pot had one of those burnt brown rings baked into it. I poured anyway. Heading up the airline? He asked without looking up. Yeah, I said. Dropping a skidder at a repair yard near. I had to pull the job ticket out of my pocket. Talmadge, he knew the name. Might be you're on the wrong side of dusk for that, he said. Just trying to get it done, I told him. He took my 5 like it was a dead thing. You keep rolling. Don't stop around the markers. What markers? He finally looked at me. His eyes were small and pale and not terribly interested in me personally. Stone markers, he said. You'll know 'em when you see 'em. I think I already saw one, I said. You keep rolling, he said again and looked back at his hands. People dump family stuff in the woods up there, old-fashioned, 'cause they don't trust the ground in town." He grimaced like he'd said more than he meant to. "Anyway, don't stop. I don't take ghost town warnings seriously. I don't take much seriously that doesn't involve brakes, tires, or my logbook." I thanked him and got back on the road. The light had dissolved into a wet gloom, and my headlights were two small cones reminding me of how much space there was around me, and how much of it was not road. The crows were replaced by nothing, which is to say by the kind of silence you can taste. The trees leaned in. This isn't a metaphor. There's a way a two-lane through old spruce can feel like a hallway. I didn't see another car for 20 minutes. When the road gave me the little shoulder again, I knew where I was before I saw it, the stone mound. Except this time I saw that the neat oval looked different. I kept the truck rolling because I had told myself I would, but my eyes hooked on the shape like burrs. The stones weren't flat anymore. The middle slumped a little, like something underneath had settled or pushed. It made a shallow trough, and the round stones in that trough had rolled tight and then stopped. I kept moving. I didn't want to be one of those people who gets out and loses the thread of the night. 2 miles later, there was a turnoff to a gravel pit. I took it just to breathe. The skidder creaked behind me like a sleeping animal. I told myself it was nothing. Some kid's weird project. A hunter's marker. A family pet. I know the ways people make meaning after a loss. My ex-wife and I had talked about it when the fertility treatment started failing and the nurse kept saying implantation, like it was a magic trick we weren't clapping hard enough to believe in. At the repair yard, a guy named Todd with a slicker and a dip cup made me sign 3 copies of a form because his boss wanted paper in triplicate since the internet don't stick up here. He didn't ask how the drive was. He didn't ask anything because he had the look of a man whose feet have been wet for a month. I unloaded the skidder and watched my breath, and the crane's breath turned to steam. When I climbed back into my cab, my knees cracked and I let myself think motel. Hot shower, bad bed. TV low enough to drown out the new silence in my head. I slept in a place that called itself the Pines Motor Lodge, but was actually just a U-shaped building in front of a black slash of trees. The office smelled like stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. The clerk was a woman with gray hair piled up and the posture of someone ready to step out back and smoke in any weather. She gave me a key on a green diamond fob and said, "Truck driver discount if you want it," and then looked at my face and added, "You look all in." "I'm good," I said. "You're not," she said, which somehow made me like her. "But you will be if you sleep." I showered until my skin went red and drank the emergency bourbon I keep in the glove box because I don't like the strange angles my thoughts take in cold, small rooms. I slept like I'd been hit with a sandbag. I woke up at 2 a.m. from a dream where I was breaking, and the rumble strips were a voice. I got up for water and realized my boots, set in their usual place by the door, were caked in wet red clay. Not brown motel mud. That same bright iron-rich red I'd seen on the shoulder, smeared and clumped. I'd left them clean at the gas station. I know because I always bang them together before I go into a place with a thin carpet and a woman who keeps her hair up like she has standards. I put my hand to the leather and felt cold, wet grit. I checked the door chain. It was set. The deadbolt was thrown. I told myself I'd stepped into a puddle on my way in and my brain had edited it out. It does that sometimes. You drive 12 hours, your brain throws out anything that doesn't matter. I rinsed the boots in the shower and went back to bed with my mouth tasting like pennies in the morning. I asked the clerk, her name tag said Norma, if there were trailheads nearby, casual, like I might have walked in the night. "Not unless you like walking into people's deer stands," she said. "Where you headed?" "Back down the airline," I said. "Bangor and then home." She made a small face at the rain beating against the office window, the kind of face people make at a kid's science project that involves something alive and stinky. "Watch for rocks," she said. "This time of year they slide." "Sure," I said. I didn't tell her about the boots. I didn't want to turn my morning into someone else's problem. I didn't want a story. I just wanted the road and the next coffee and the sound of the wipers. I got both, and I got something else too. 20 minutes down, just past a culvert with a bent guardrail, I saw the stone mound again. Only now there were pale marks on the mud shoulder beside it. 2 long arcs like something heavy had been set down, dragged, then lifted. I eased off the gas without telling my foot to do it. My pulse went squirrel quick. I know the tread on my front tires because I had to replace them last month. Michelin's with a distinctive center rib. The arcs in the mud weren't arcs. They were half circles. My exact tread, doubled like I'd parked with my front wheels close to the mound and then left. I had not stopped here. Not the first time up. Not last night. I would swear it under oath. The rain was fine and straight, almost polite. The trees were still. Everything around me looked like it had taken a deep breath and was holding it. I pulled the truck onto the shoulder and opened my door very carefully, like making a noise would be admitting something. I hate that I did that. It sounds dramatic, and I'm not a dramatic man. The stones were wet. They smelled clean, like the inside of a river. Up close, I could see they weren't just dumped. They were placed. The big ones on the outside to hold the shape, the small ones in the middle, the whole thing convincing as something that didn't want to move. But it had moved. The middle sagged. The red earth peered up between stones like gums without teeth. I crouched, my jeans soaking through, and put my hand on the stones the way you might put your hand on a person's shoulder, if you're not sure how they'll take it. They were cold. That was all. No heat, no vibration, no whisper, nothing. I told myself to go. I got back in the truck. I put it in gear. I looked at the mound in my mirror until it was a gray smudge and then a memory. Around Clifton, I called my ex-wife because I needed a human voice that remembered something about me beyond load weights and dates. She didn't pick up. It went to voicemail and I hung up before the beep because I didn't want to hear my own voice waver. At the same gas station, the man with the pale eyes was still on his stool, counting or cutting lottery scratchers, I don't know. I walked in with my boots clean. This I checked twice, and I asked him, the markers. Who stacks them? People, he said. He said it like I was dumb. Is it a grave? I asked. He shrugged. Everything's a grave if you wait long enough. I saw tire marks by one, I said. Like someone pulled off and, you know. You pulled off, he said. I didn't. He cut his eyes up to me then, not mean, just measuring. You ever heard yourself snore? He asked. I don't snore, I said. He shook his head. Nobody thinks they do. I didn't like the way my chest felt then, crowded and empty, the way a blind feels when the wind gets behind it. I took my coffee and left. The rain had picked up into actual drops. I thought about stopping at Norma's to say something that would qualify as conversation, to put a pin in the feeling that the rooms we pass through are empty after we leave them. But the road had me and I let it. I wish I could say that was the end, that I went home and forgot, and all I have now is a folk tale I tell when the light is right. I did go home. I did not forget. The thing is, it kept coming to me in small ways that looked like nothing until they were only something. A week later, I braked hard on I-95 when a car cut me off, and from somewhere under the seat I heard a sound like stones shifting, small ones rolling, nesting into each other. I pulled into the next rest area and tore the cab apart. There was nothing. Just the little gravel that always finds its way onto floor mats. But the sound had been, this is going to sound stupid, personal, like a cat settling. 2 weeks after that, I woke from a nap at a truck stop outside Augusta with my hand closed around something I didn't remember picking up. It was a short bit of wood, maybe 6 inches long, rounded on one end, one side scraped clean. A stake. I threw it away so hard it thunked the inside of the trash barrel, and then, because I'm a rational man and not dramatic, I shrugged and bought a sandwich. The dreams when they came were simple. No monsters, no faces, no messages in blood. Just the sound of my brakes pulsing under my foot and the feeling that if I looked in the mirror at the right second, I would see stones tumbling along behind me like a little river riding the air. I stopped telling people about the nothings. They make worse stories when you're awake. In late November, I had a route back up toward Bangor. The map on my phone showed the same line cutting through the same green. I told myself I'd go a different way. I told dispatch I needed to avoid the airline because of construction. There wasn't any. And then I forgot my own instruction and let the GPS take me to the road that wanted me. I don't have an excuse. Habit is strong, so is the part of me that wanted to go back and see my own lie, standing there in the wet like a scarecrow. It was daylight this time, the kind you could still scramble an egg by if you had the patience. The rain had eased to that fine sift that never lands. I drove with both windows cracked because I wanted to smell the pine and the rot and remind myself I was a man in a truck and not a name on a piece of wood. I passed the culvert with the bent rail. I saw the opening in the trees. I pulled over. The mound was not a mound anymore. The stones were scattered not far, as if pushed outward by a body stretching after sleep. In the middle, the earth made a shallow depression that matched a person in that general way Clay remembers the shape of a hand pressed into it. There were no bones. There was nothing really except the shape and the idea that something had been here and was no longer, and that perhaps that thing was an idea itself, an outline waiting to be filled. I told myself, animal. I told myself, frost heave. I told myself, you are an adult and you're going to take a breath and laugh and go back to your truck and be a person who doesn't make shapes into stories. Then I saw the wood. It lay at the head of the depression, half sunk in the soft dirt, about as long as my forearm. It had been carved with something sharp, maybe a nail, maybe a knife. I could see the jaggedness of the cuts even from where I stood. You already know what it said. I knew before I pulled it free. David in crooked letters, the D's too big for the word. The way a kid writes a name he knows better spoken than seen. I thought, for a second, about the gas station guy, about how easy it would be for him to hear my name when I handed him a credit card and send his bored nephew out here with a 2x2 and a pocket knife. I thought about Norma writing the names of her guests down in a ledger. I thought about all the ways a thing can become an accident. I held the wood the way you hold a fish you're not sure is still alive. Okay, I said out loud because the woods were so quiet it felt rude not to say anything. Okay. A wind came then, not strong, just enough to make the top of the spruce whisper and the hair on my arms rise. There was the smell of something sweet and old, like wet paper that used to be perfume. I don't know why that scared me more than finding my name carved on a stake, but it did. It made the day feel tilted, like a trailer backing wrong. I put the wood back where I'd found it. I didn't want to take anything from that place, not even my own name. I walked to the truck. I got in, closed the door, and the sound of the seals taking the weather out felt like a blessing. I drove away before the part of me that wants to look back could win. I didn't call anyone about it. Who would I call? A state trooper? Tell him someone vandalized a pile of rocks with my name? I didn't want to be the guy who takes a cop off a real road for a story about stones. I told myself I'd stop at the gas station and ask the pale-eyed man what he knew. I told myself I'd see Norma and ask her if she'd ever seen boys screwing around on the shoulder. But when I came to the turn for the station, I kept going. When I came to the motel, my hands stayed at 12 and 4. Because the thing about answers is they grow a shape around you just like the clay had done, and I didn't want a shape. I wanted a line. I wanted forward. Back home, I did a wrong thing. I started reading. Newspapers, boards like this one, local history sites. People with too much time and the same restless hum in their chest write about cairns and burial customs. About old logging towns where a person dying in winter meant waiting until spring to tuck them properly into the ground. I learned that some folks would lay stones to keep animals out and grief in. I learned that people used to write names on anything handy. Scrap wood, a tin lid, a smooth river rock, until something better could be made. Often nothing better came. I didn't learn anything that explained why my boots had been red at 2 in the morning, why I'd held a steak in my hand after waking up, or why the smell of wet paper would turn my stomach some nights when the heat kicked on. The last thing, because I guess you want one, happened on I-84 the following spring. It was bright out, the kind of day where you feel like a good person for no reason. A state trooper pulled me over near Sturbridge for a random inspection. He was young, polite in that careful way they teach them now. He asked for my logs and told me to step out so we could check the trailer lights. I did. I'm no cowboy. I like laws. He walked around the front of my truck and stopped. He bent down, frowned, and touched something under the bumper. When he straightened, he was holding a small smooth stone, gray, the size of a hen's egg. You know you've got this wedged up in your grill? He said, casual, like talking about a leaf. I didn't, I said. I really didn't. I would have told you if I did. He turned the stone in his hand and his eyebrows went up just a little. Huh, he said. He angled it so I could see. On the smooth belly of the rock, scratched faint but sure, was my name. Not the crooked stake letters. Tighter, smaller. David R. Like a form filled out at a counter when there's a line behind you. I pick up all kinds of road trash, I said. My voice sounded normal. It sounded like me. He shrugged and handed the rock to me. Souvenir, he said. Not illegal last I checked, I took it. It was cooler than the air and a little damp, not wet. Damp? Like a thing that had just been brought up from below deck. I put it on the passenger seat and watched him walk the perimeter of my rig, tapping lights, confirming that everything blinked like it ought to. When he climbed back in his cruiser and pulled out, I put the stone in the glove box with the registration because I didn't know where else to put it. I told myself I'd throw it out at the next stop. Then the next, it's still there. Sometimes when I take a hard corner and the tires buck against the seam in the pavement, I can hear a soft rattle in that compartment. Registration, a couple of small tools, a stone with my name that nobody carved that I will admit to. I don't drive the airline anymore. When dispatch asks, I invent construction. I say the bridge near Wesley is down. I say the truck needs service and can't handle the grades. It's a lie, but it's a lie that keeps the thread of the night where I can see it. I could give you morals. Don't stop on lonely roads. Don't open the glove box if you don't have to. Don't put your name out where anything can pick it up and hand it back to you for keeps. But that's not what this is. This is just a record. I saw a neat grave-shaped pile of stones where nobody was, and later it looked like something had been trying to remember how to get out. My boots were muddy with a color I can name. I touched wood with my first name scratched in it at one end of a narrow quiet. A policeman gave me a smooth rock that says I exist. Sometimes I hold the wheel too tight and the truck tells me to loosen up by humming in a way that says metal is tired of being held. Sometimes I sleep well. Most mornings I wake up and I still rain up there in my head, and the trees are still leaning in and I can smell wet pine and that rotten sweet perfume of something that used to be a person. If I brake hard enough, I can hear the little rattle of loose stones from the glove box, shifting just a little like something still buried under me. I don't know the rules for telling a story like this without sounding dramatic, so I'm just going to talk the way I would if we were sitting at my kitchen table. My name's Claire Hensley. I'm 33, a freelance photographer, and I moved back to California after a rough year of burnout and panic attacks that made city life feel like a bag over my head. I tell people I like shooting forgotten places because they're quiet and honest. That's mostly true. What's also true is that sometimes the quiet notices you back. This happened late September, the week after the first cold nights. I had a magazine assignment to document neglected cemeteries for a small historical quarterly, in a town nobody would recognize unless they'd gotten lost on a forest road. My brother Jason insisted on coming along. He's 29, built like he could move a refrigerator by himself and embarrassingly gentle about it. He worries because of the panic stuff. He calls it being my anchor. I tell him I just need someone to carry the tripod and the Pelican case. We meet in the middle. We drove north out of Sacramento, then cut west toward the mountains, following creeks that hid under bridges and old logging roads. On the map, the cemetery was a little square of green on the wrong side of a faded county line. In person, it was a patch of fenced ground half swallowed by manzanita and pine, a late 1800s graveyard where the headstones leaned like teeth and the iron pickets were red with rust. People called the creek beside it Big Bear Creek, even though no one we met had seen a bear there in years. The air smelled like resin and old smoke, the kind that clings to bark for seasons after a fire. In the afternoons, a breeze rattled needles high up. At night, everything went dead still. No crickets, no owls. Even the creek seemed to hush itself. We set camp about 100 yards from the fence, close enough that the graves were shapes in the trees when the light fell, far enough that we could pretend we were just there for the water and the flat ground. There was a narrow maintenance track down to the creek, and a green metal sign half folded over that said county property. No interment without permit. It made us laugh. Like there was a rush to get in. Day one was normal. I walked the stones with a notebook. I shot close-ups of lichen blooming across names and dates, the little lambs and carved hands pointing up. Birds fluttered through at twilight, black commas against the tree line. We ate packet soup and Jason tried to rig the food up in a bag, but there wasn't a branch he trusted to hold it. Around 10, the cold crept in. My panic has a way of peeking over my shoulder at night, so I did my breathing while I watched the stars. It was one of those skies that could make you forget your own name. I slept through till dawn, which for me is a small miracle. I don't even remember a dream. Jason woke me by unzipping the tent too fast. "Claire," he said, "you need to look at this." I sat up with that hair on the neck feeling before I knew why. He wasn't using his teasing voice. He had the careful voice, the one he uses when he's trying not to spook me. He led me to the fence. There was a grave near the middle, A rectangle of earth so fresh it was darker than everything else, the way potholes are after rain. The soil was damp, piled neatly like a mouth opened and then closed again in the wrong place. No shovels. No footprints we could see, though the grass was scrubby and the ground took prints weird. The headstone wasn't one of the old marble ones. It was a flat slate slab, unreadable, with a chunk missing off the corner where the iron pickets had collapsed against it. If you told me the grave had always been raised like that, I might have believed you. But we had walked every row the day before. Jason swore he remembered this spot. It was level, he said. I stepped right here and the dirt dipped. I thought it was gopher tunnels. I took photos. That's what I do when I don't know how to feel yet. The camera makes a frame. Frames tame things. I told myself. Old cemetery, sinkholes happen. Maybe a big animal rooting around at night. The soil smelled like wet stone, like under a river. That day I kept working. The magazine wanted a sense of place more than a list of names, so I shot the fence. The shadow of the fence. Old beer cans half buried under needles. The strand of barbed wire growing into a pine. We saw no one. A green truck rolled past on the ridge road around 3 p.m., slow and indifferent. A ranger, Jason said. He waved and got a nod back. We waved too, late, like kids. By sundown, the temperature dropped hard. We built an allowed little fire in the pit someone else had made years back and ate ravioli straight from the pan. And the silly comfort of that carried us until it didn't. The stillness came down like a lid. It pressed at my ears. I could hear Jason swallow. We told stories we'd told each other since we were teenagers. We pretended to hear owls. When the flames went low, we banked coals and zipped ourselves into our sleeping bags with that surface-brave feeling like you get on a plane right before takeoff. I woke around 2 to a sound like breath. Not a person. The creek. I told myself it had picked up because of something upstream. I lay there thinking of all the pressure above us in the dark. The tall trees, the ridge, the sky that stopped looking friendly the second the moon moved behind a cloud. I counted inhales. I counted exhales. And I slept again. Morning 2, the grave was different. I noticed it before Jason did. The soil had slumped away from the rectangle, like hands had smoothed it flat and a wind had traced the edges. It looked slept in. The earth kept the dark color of damp clay, even though everywhere else was drying out. The dirt had a little gleam to it like it had a skin. We should go, Jason said. Pack up, move camp down the road. This is some local crap. I don't want to be in the middle of it. Local crap like what? I asked. I don't know. Hazing. Pranks. Weirdos. He said. You know the stories. I did know. I also knew we were supposed to be documenting this very place. And the thought of coming back later felt worse than staying another night. I told him I needed a few hours to finish my shots and then we could decide. He agreed because he's my brother and he wants me to finish things when I start them. We spent the day downstream. I waited to get angles on the cemetery through the rippled water, shot the fence inverted in the creek, shot the way the trees made a notch of sky that never moved. A thin older man in a denim jacket walked past on the road around noon, the kind of guy who looks like he grew out of the mountain. He didn't come down to us. He lifted 2 fingers and kept going. When I think about him now, I wonder if he was walking toward something or away. Around 4, a county truck pulled up behind the green sign. A sheriff's deputy stepped out. She had that tough, kind face that reads tired from a distance. She told us there had been reports of squatters. We told her it was just us. She asked for our names. I gave her my card because it felt like a shield. Claire Hensley Photography, website, email. I made a joke about ghosts. She didn't laugh. She asked if we'd seen anyone. We hadn't. She told us not to camp in the cemetery. I said we weren't. She looked at the fence like she was counting how many pickets were missing. Night gets strange up here, she said finally, and not like a warning, just a line. Jason asked what she meant. She looked past him at the trees and said, Fog, sound carries funny. People get turned around. Just keep a light handy. When she left, he watched her taillights until they were threads. That evening, we kept the fire going as long as we could. Jason paced and then apologized for pacing. I tried to look like I wasn't checking the time. When we turned in, I put my camera on a little tripod in the tent doorway facing the fence through the mesh. I wasn't thinking of catching anything. I just wanted proof of nothing happening. I set it to shoot on motion. I told Jason. He said, good, in a voice that wanted to be sarcastic and missed. I slept badly. I dreamed I was sorting prints in a dark room that didn't have walls, just tall grass, and every image was a rectangle of soil that got darker when I lifted it. The red light pulsed like a heartbeat. I woke to the color black. No sound, no creak, just the crown-heavy hush like we were under a bell jar. My tongue felt dry and gritty. I turned my head on the pillow and heard a soft rain of something land next to my ear. The smell hit a second later, wet earth. I reached up and touched my hair. Then I reached up again because I didn't want to believe it. My fingers came away lined with tiny crumbs of mud. I don't remember moving. By the time I could think, my shoes were on and I was outside with the flashlight. Jason unclipped the tent behind me and stumbled after me, still zipping his jacket. I took 3 steps and the beam shook across the fence, across the rows of stones, across the middle. The grave was open. Not deep like a movie, but hollowed the way a stream digs into a bank. The rectangle was clean, sides smooth as if pressed by hands. The soil that had been inside was stacked along the edges in a tidy berm, like a careful person had peeled back a blanket and laid it aside. If you asked me whether someone could do that in the time between midnight and 2 a.m. without a sound, I'd tell you no. If you asked me whether an animal could, I'd tell you no again. The top layer glistened as if sweating. Jason swore under his breath. He grabbed my shoulder a little harder than was necessary and said, "Back to camp, now." I was ready to obey, and then light caught on something in the hollow. I swung the beam, a pale shape. For a second, my heart took the elevator to the basement. It was only a rock, half of a slate corner like the one the headstone had missing. I don't know why that made it worse. The earth had given up a piece of what marked it. We went back to the tent. We did not sleep. Jason sat with his knees up, looking at the screen on my camera like it was a window. Around dawn, the creek remembered itself and began to talk again. Birds made small, cautious noises. The sky came up in layers. When the light was honest enough to feel safe being scared, I checked my pockets. Dirt lines under my nails. Not a lot. Enough. I didn't do anything, I said out loud, and heard the thinness in my voice. Jason was opening and closing his fists like he was trying to squeeze the night out of them. "Okay," he said. "We're done. No argument. I'll break camp. You get your gear." "We're out," I nodded. I wanted out. That's what I remember thinking. I keep coming back to that because it matters later. The fresh grave that morning was closed. Not just filled. Smoothed to flat again, a neat lid. If you squinted, you could pretend nothing had happened, that nothing was happening now. The soil was still darker than anything around it. The air above the rectangle had a cooler feel, like standing near a fridge. We packed fast. Jason did the heavy work. Big motions like he was trying to scare off something that watched motion more than sound. I wrapped lenses with the clumsy care of someone wrapping a present while their house is on fire. When I rolled the tent, crumbs of dirt fell out of the flap. I forced myself not to look for more inside. I forced myself not to think about my hair. Before we left, I walked to the fence line because some part of me believed that not looking was how people in stories got trapped. I took 3 more photos. The same rectangle, the same wrong color. On the last shot, the camera stuttered. A mechanical hesitation I've never had with it before and haven't since. It's a dumb detail to include, but when your life has the shape of a normal day, you notice the dumb details. We drove into town for cell service. The gas station had a hand-lettered sign on the door that said "No bathroom," and another that said "Cash preferred," like the 2 concepts were connected. The older man in the denim jacket stood at the coffee machine, stirring with a wooden stick for an amount of time that couldn't be normal. He looked at me once, and it was the kind of look people give when they already know how your story ends. I nearly asked him if he knew about the cemetery. I didn't. I bought a water, and Jason bought beef jerky he didn't eat. Back at the Ridge Road turnout, a ranger had parked and was working on a culvert with a shovel. Not a shovel in the night kind of shovel. The normal kind that lives on the back of a truck. Jason asked about the cemetery. The ranger shrugged and said the fence cut in a corner of public land the county had gotten stuck with. "People still plant their dead up there sometimes," he said. "You wouldn't think so, but they do. Family plots and all that. Permits are for the living." He said it like a joke, and he laughed at it alone. When we got back to camp, the place felt wrong in a fresh way, like someone had put everything back in exactly the places we'd left them but a millimeter off. Jason said he was going to fill the fire pit, And then we would call the magazine from town and explain we needed to photograph a different cemetery, any cemetery. I said, okay. I say that now and I hear how reasonable it sounds, and that's the trap. Reasonable things will kill you as gently as unreasonable ones. We argued once, a small argument that didn't matter on the surface and did underneath. Jason wanted to take the direct route out that cut between the fence and the creek because it shaved off 10 minutes. I wanted to go the long way up the road because my hand shook and the fence meant the graves and the graves meant the rectangle. In the end, he followed me because that's what he does, and we took the road. We would have left then. We almost did. I was in the front seat, buckled, camera bag on my lap because the empty trunk felt like a mouth. Jason circled back to the camp edge to grab a bungee cord we'd left on a stump. He took 2 steps, then 3, then stopped, looking in the kind of not-looking way you do when you sense something at the corner of your eye and wish yourself blind. "Claire," he said, and it wasn't the careful voice or the joking one. It was the voice I remember from when Dad died. A sudden new voice none of us owned until that day. Did you move the tripod?" I hadn't. It was an accusation and a prayer, and neither fit. The little tripod that had held the camera in the tent doorway last night sat on the stump, legs splayed, pointed toward the fence. The camera wasn't on it. The camera was in my hands. I had packed it. In the tiny plastic clamp was a dirty twig, as if someone had offered it to be held. "Get in the truck," Jason said again. He threw the bungee in the bed and jumped in. We drove. We made it maybe a mile. The road curved along the creek, tall pines leaning into the arc. There was a downed branch across the lane. Not big, movable, not there an hour ago. Jason braked, put it in park, left the engine running because he's the kind of person who thinks of that, and went to the branch. I watched him lift it and carry it to the side. I watched him look past the headlights into the trees. He came back, closed his door, and the truck didn't start. Not the battery kind of dead. The kind where the key turns and you hear a whir and then nothing. He tried again. He looked at me like he was doing math he didn't trust. We didn't say, of course, we didn't say this is stupid. We sat until the engine turned over like it had never failed. When we got back to cell service, we called the magazine. I told the editor I had enough for a draft and might pick up a second location next month. He said, "Great, Claire," in that distracted voice all editors possess at birth. We got lunch at a diner. The waitress had a tattoo of a pine cone on her forearm. And for the first time in 2 days, I felt something like the world bending back toward ordinary. We argued about whether to tell Mom anything if she called. We decided not to because why? And then, because I'm an idiot, because I needed proof I wasn't crazy, because the camera hadn't given me an image of anything but the rectangle, we went back for one more night. I can already hear what you'll say. I've said it to myself so many times I could write it on the backs of my eyelids. "This is what you want to do?" Jason asked, and he wasn't angry, just tired. Deep mind tired. But he put the truck in drive and he took me there. It was already dark when we got to camp. The cold got in under our jackets like a small considered hand. I set the camera up again, this time on the big tripod just outside our tent, pointed square through the fence at the grave. Motion sensor on, then a timer as a backup. I checked it twice. I made Jason watch me check. He tried to make a joke about paranormal YouTubers and blew the timing so badly we both laughed anyway. Sometimes a bad joke is the only rope you get. Before bed, the deputy from the day before rolled by slow on the ridge road. We saw the wash of her headlights through the trees. She didn't stop. The red taillights slid away. I remember wishing she had. I remember thinking, you could put a person in your passenger seat and make them safe by keeping them talking the whole drive back to town. I couldn't put that sentence in my mouth. I lay on my back and stared at the tent ceiling while the memory of the camera red light blinked behind my eyelids. I tried not to think about the smell of dirt. I tried not to think about flat slate and missing corners. I told myself, I'm awake. I am awake. I am awake. What I know next, I only know because of the files on my memory card. Morning came like a mercy and then broke itself. The tent zipper stuck for half a second like it had lips. I pushed it free. The campsite was neat like we'd cleaned it, which isn't our style. Jason wasn't there. The coffee kettle sat on the rock. The tripod stood where I had left it, empty. My camera lay 2 feet away, facing the ground. The power light blinked its dumb, patient blink. "Jason," I said. The sound of my own voice scared me more than silence. I walked to the fence. The grave was filled. The soil was flat. The color wasn't right. It had that same wet sheen, like it held more cold than the air around it. There were footprints in the grass to the left of it, then a mess where the grass turned into the maintenance track. The mess made no sense. Loops like a hose had been laid and dragged. Not footprints, not tire marks. I felt the tilt begin inside me, the one that says you're at the end of the map and the water falls away. I turned the camera on. My hands shook enough to make the screen double. First file, 12:31 a.m. The tent flap in black and white. Stars through mesh like fish scales. Second file, 2:07 a.m. motion. I walked into frame. Calm, hands at my sides, barefoot. I never go barefoot outside. The dirt didn't seem to touch my feet. That sounds dramatic. I mean, I didn't leave prints. I walked to the fence where the pickets sag. I stepped between them without lifting my arms. I moved like I knew exactly how narrow the gap was. I crossed the rows without looking down at the stones. I climbed into the grave. Not a jump or a fall. I lay down, my hands folded across my stomach, one wrist hooked over the other like a person is taught. I looked small. I am not a small person. The frame went black. Third file, 4:13 a.m. Empty rectangle. The edges a little higher, like something had pressed from beneath. The wind moved in the trees, finally a sound. Then the motion sensor turned off. There were a dozen more short clips. Nothing in them but leaf motion and the red of the dot when the infrared reflected off the fence. I watched them all standing under a sky getting too bright too fast. I didn't feel much. I think that's the kindest thing your body can do sometimes. Go down the hall and close enough doors that the sound becomes only a hum. I called Jason's name until my voice ran out. I followed the loops in the grass to the track and then to the creek and then back to the loops. I don't know how long I did that. There's a place between panic and exhaustion that feels like you're walking underwater while someone moves the furniture 2 inches to the left every time you look away. I tried the ranger's number off the sign by the culvert. It went to a recorded line. I called 911. The deputy came fast. She brought another car, another deputy, a younger guy who kept touching the brim of his hat and looking at my camera like it might bite. I showed them the footage. The woman watched it without moving. When it went black, she tapped the screen once with her thumb and handed it back to me. "You're Claire," she said. "Where's your brother usually go when he's off by himself?" "He's not. He wouldn't just go," I said. My mouth felt like a pocket without a lining. They searched. They brought a dog. The dog whined and wouldn't take the track past the fence. They walked the creek and the logging road, and then they walked it again with more people and radios that made soft popping sounds. They put coffee in my hand. Sometimes 3 people asked me the same question in a row like they wanted to catch me in a lie. I didn't have the imagination to tell. When the sun got high, clouds pulled themselves across it like a bedsheet someone was trying to fix in wind. 2 days later, they found me. If that sentence sounds like a jump cut, it is. I don't remember the days in between as anything but compartments. Someone zipped me into one and I sat there and looked at my hands. Someone unzipped one and I was outside and the air smelled the way it had the first night. Resin and a far campfire you couldn't find by walking. I remember a blanket. I remember the older man in the denim jacket standing at the edge of the tape, not looking at me, looking at the fence like counting again. I remember the deputy crouching so she could be at my level. They say they found me sitting beside the filled grave. The soil was warm to the touch. That's the line in my report that reads like a typo and isn't. They asked me what happened. I couldn't give them the sentence they needed. The last piece I own with any edges on it is the video of me walking in calm and laying myself down like I was waiting for someone to tuck me in. After that, the world is a smear and then a click and then a chair and the earth flat and wrong in front of me. I had dirt under my nails again. Not much, enough. People ask. My therapist, my mother. 2 different reporters who called because they can smell certain kinds of stories. If I think I sleepwalked. Maybe. If you're trying to put a label on something to quiet your heart, that one works as well as any. Do I think someone took my brother? I think you can be taken by a place. I think there are hollows in the world where things go to be remembered, and sometimes they get it backwards and remember you until you're the part that isn't sure. I don't go back. I didn't finish the assignment. The magazine ran a spread of my first day, shots with a caption about the quiet dignity of our forgotten past. I look at the page sometimes and it feels like a mean joke. The world played with a straight face at night. I keep my phone by my bed with a light on it like the deputy told us. That sounds silly in an apartment in a town with sirens and neighbors and a laundromat that runs all night. It helps a little. Sleep is still tricky. Most nights it comes in and sits at the foot of the bed and waits me out. When I do dream, the dreams are steady and small like trains on a schedule. I take a picture, I file it. I take a picture, I file it. And underneath each print there's a dusting of dark soil that never smears no matter how I rub. That's not how dreams behave, I know, but you're not here to audit my brain. The sheriff called me last week to tell me in the kind voice that nothing new has turned up. People find their way out, she said. Sometimes not back here. I thanked her because I didn't know what else you say to a person doing her job inside your nightmare. In the daylight, I can balance things. I can say to myself, counties misplace paperwork. People fall in creeks and walk along them until a logging road takes them north. Cameras malfunction. Brains try to save their owners by turning the lights off for a while. All of that can be true at once. Then some nights the air goes still. No cars, no upstairs neighbor, no heater kick. And it's like something deep under the building remembers it used to be a hill with pines on it. The silence peels back and I can smell resin and distant smoke. And I know if I got up and walked to the door, if I didn't turn on a light and just kept going, I would find myself where the fence sags and the grass gives way to soil that holds its cool too long. I'd know the exact size of the gap without lifting my arms. I'd know how to lie down to fit. People tell me the earth forgets, that the fastest thing in the world is how quickly a grave smooths back to level in the rain. Maybe. But sometimes I think it's the other way, that the ground keeps every impression we press into it, and now and then it wants you to see how well it's been paying attention. The deputy asked me at the end if I had anything I wanted to put on record. I said no then because I couldn't line up the words. This is the sentence I should have given her, the one I will probably send her someday when my hands don't shake. It's strange. I still dream in that same soil like it's remembering me back. I don't usually write things like this. I'm 66 now and I've spent most of my life outdoors with a tripod and a prism pole, not hunched over a keyboard. My name is Marcus Ellery. I was a surveyor before I retired, the kind who still trusts a plumb bob more than an app. If you've ever watched a road appear where there used to be woods, or a chain-link fence slide a foot closer to the neighbor's shed after a friendly talk, people like me were somewhere nearby with orange flags and notebooks. 2 summers ago, when I was 56 and still trying to keep my hands busy, so my head wouldn't think too much, I agreed to help with a family matter down in Kentucky, in the Appalachian foothills. My niece Laura called me. She's my brother's girl, sharp, distrustful, quick to roll her eyes. 27 at the time. She doesn't like asking anyone for help, especially me. I hadn't been much of an uncle after her dad died, and I know she blames me a little for not showing up more. I can live with that. I live with worse. Just a simple mapping job, she said over the phone. We need to settle the boundary for the inheritance. Devil's Hollow. You know it? I did, in the way a map knows a place, contours, creeks, and old right-of-way. Devil's Hollow isn't a town. It's a fold in the hills. A place where the air sits too long and summer stacks on itself until it feels like syrup. Cicadas drone there like electricity. I told her I'd come. I wanted something to do and a reason not to sit in the house staring at my wife's coffee mug. She's gone. It wasn't my fault, not in the way you can point at. But guilt doesn't need a map to find you. It gets in anyway. We met at a gas station with a flickering light that made the mosquitoes look like sparks. Laura tossed her pack into the back of my truck and climbed in without saying hello. Close up, she has our family's eyes and our family's stubborn chin. Her hair was yanked back and she had a fresh tattoo on her wrist that read "Hold Fast." She caught me looking and pulled her sleeve down. Property lines, she said, tapping the dash like we were late. The old plat's a mess. Aunt May says the fence once marked the family plot. We just need to prove where it runs so the cousins stop fighting. Where's May? I asked. Dead, she said, and then softer. Last winter I hadn't heard. That's how far I'd drifted from everyone. We headed up the county road, then a gravel cut, then 2 ruts through knee-high grass. Heat rolled off the land in waves that warped the distant tree line. The cicadas were so loud I could feel them in my teeth. Even with the windows down, the truck smelled like hot metal and ticks. We passed a sagging farmhouse where 3 kids with dirty faces watched us like we were a parade. A man on the porch lifted 2 fingers off a beer can and didn't blink. Later, when I think back, I wonder if he knew where we were going. I wonder what he would have said if I'd stopped. We parked where the road became roots, a lip of clay at the mouth of the hollow. The place had earned its name honestly. It felt like a bowl collecting heat and noise. You could see where people had dragged trash down there years ago. An old refrigerator split open like a white rib cage, a rusted bed frame, bottles sunk in damp soil. The fence we were there for started to the right of all that, where the slope leveled out. Hand-forged iron posts, twisted into simple crosses, shoulder-high, strung together with a strap of iron that had once been straight and now bowed like a sickle. Someone had made them a long time ago. It wasn't factory work. The welds looked like fingers that had tried to hold. Charming, Laura said. Hillbilly vampires kept out by pure Appalachia iron. I was glad she joked. It meant she wasn't scared yet. Iron's honest, I said. Does what it does. We set up camp before the worst of the evening bugs came out. I still had my old canvas wall tent, patched and stained, big enough for 2 cots and a folding table. Laura insisted on her own little backpacking tent, tight as a drum and brand new. She'd rather vanish into her own space than share mine, and I understood. I checked my equipment. Total station, prism, a handheld GPS that had teeth marks from an old dog, survey tape, rebar stakes, fluorescent flagging in orange and lime. Work has a rhythm that calms me. It felt good to move through it. We walked the fence line to get our bearings. The crosses weren't evenly spaced and they weren't in a straight line, not exactly. They wove along the contour, following a kind of drunken logic. The ground inside the fence grew a different kind of grass, paler and brittle. Not a circle or a rectangle, but something that had been measured with the eye and the hand and some old memory instead of a deed. I found the remnants of a corner marker, stone stacked into a little cairn with a flat rock on top. There were names carved into the flat rock, but most were lost to weather. A few letters and dates here and there. E. Ellery, M18. The chisel marks had the same feel as the welds, work done by someone who meant it to last. You didn't tell me we're on your side of the family, I said. Laura shrugged. May said it all hooked back together if you went far enough. Everyone here's someone's cousin. That's the joke. We flagged a baseline and ran a few shots before dusk. The numbers didn't make sense even then. The distances were fine, but the backsight wouldn't close the way it should. Tiny errors I could account for, sure. Heat shimmer, a handful of seconds in the angle. But it was like the line itself didn't want to be pinned. We stood by the fence while the light went gray and the cicadas surged for their evening chorus. The iron crosses threw long shadows that looked more like ropes than crosses. Laura leaned on one and it gave a small metal complaint, a dry squeal like a gate. She lifted her hands, eyes wide. Kid caught in church. Careful, I said, too sharp. What, you're afraid the ancestors are going to file a complaint? Things tip, I said, and it's getting dark. That's when I heard it, a scrape like metal dragged over rock, not close, not far. The fence didn't move. Nothing moved, not even the heat. A second scrape, softer, as if whatever had made the first noise wanted to take it back. You hear that? I asked. Hear what? She tilted her head. The cicadas? Marcus, it's Kentucky in July, that's all you're going to hear. We ate sandwiches in the thick air. Fireflies twitched around us like falling sparks. Laura scrolled on her phone until it died, then tried to act like she hadn't wanted it anyway. I lay awake longer than I should have, sweating on top of my sleeping bag. I kept thinking about my wife's voice saying, "You don't have to fix everything, Mark." After she died, people told me to let the guilt go. They said it like you would say, "Put down the box. It's heavy." It's true, but where do you set it? I heard the scrape again close to midnight like a blade dragged slow. I told myself it was a deer stepping on an old piece of tin. I told myself a lot of things until I slept. In the morning, the farthest cross on the eastern side had turned 20 degrees. It wasn't subtle. Every cross had been aimed roughly north-south, not because they were supposed to be, just because whoever sank them knew how to set something square. But this one was off, cocked, aimed hard toward camp. I put my hands on my hips and stood there too long. Laura came up behind me, a mug of instant coffee in her hand, hair matted. She followed my stare and snorted. Yeah, okay. Which one of the cousins drove out here at dawn to mess with us? Or was it you? I didn't answer. I circled the cross and looked at the soil around the base. There was a hard cap of clay and rock, and then you could see where someone had dug at it. Just enough, then tamped it back. A boot heel shaped the dirt like a thumbprint. Laura, I said, did you come out here last night? I went to pee behind a tree like a raccoon, she said. Why? Your boots, I said. They've got fresh clay packed on the right one. The red stuff. We weren't in that dirt yesterday. She looked down, frowning like I'd pointed out a stain on a shirt she hadn't noticed. It's from the road. We didn't stand in that color. Not yesterday. So now you're a mud expert? I dropped it. You don't win points arguing with someone who thinks they're being accused of something. We ran our line again. The numbers were worse. The backside varied by 1.5 minutes, then 3 minutes, then closed somehow, as if it had given up resisting out of boredom. I wrote it all down anyway. At noon, a man in overalls stopped at the mouth of the hollow and watched us for a while. I waved. He didn't wave back. Laura called him background character number 5 under her breath. He left without coming down. That evening, the scrape came earlier, just at dusk, with the cicadas still singing like power lines. I walked the fence with my headlamp. Every cross looked the same as it had in the afternoon. I told myself maybe the heat shifted metal just enough to make a noise. I told myself the strap that connected the crosses was pulling against a warped post and making a sound like a hinge. Metal lies only when you ask it to hold something it doesn't want to hold. We slept. I woke at 3 to the sound of hammering, clean, ringing blows of iron on iron, the kind of noise you feel in your teeth. It echoed in the hollow and carried under my skin. For a second, I forgot where I was. I reached for my wife like I used to when a storm woke us, and my hand met air. I sat up, heart going too fast, and said, "Laura?" Into the dark. There was a flicker of light through my tent wall. Laura's headlamp moving. I jammed my feet into boots, grabbed my own lamp, and unzipped the flap. The air hit me first, damp and thick. The hammering came again, sharp enough to make the hair on my arms rise, and I followed it. She was 20 feet from my tent at the edge of the paler grass, kneeling over a fresh scar in the ground. She had one of my iron stakes and the orange mallet. She raised it high and brought it down on the head of the stake. Clean strike, square. She's stronger than she looks. Sparks ticked off the top of the stake and died in the dew. "Laura," I said, somewhere between a whisper and a shout. "What are you doing?" She flinched, then looked up at me, and for a second I saw a little girl caught with a cookie. Then her face shut. "So you'll stay?" she said. Calm, matter of fact, like she was telling me she'd put the kettle on. "What?" "So you'll stay," she said again. "You keep leaving," the cicadas droned. I could hear my breathing and hers. Her right boot had that red clay caked around the edge, fresh and wet. The iron stake she'd driven leaned slightly toward my tent. The strap that linked the crosses ran past us like a road, and I saw that 2 of the crosses we checked earlier had turned. One pointed at my tent. One pointed at the center of the plot. "You're sleepwalking," I said, immediately knowing she wasn't. Or, "Laura, you need to put the mallet down." She tilted her head. "You hear them?" "Hear who?" She looked past me into the dark as if someone stood at my shoulder. "They keep saying it wrong," she said. "They say stay like it's a threat. It's not. It's help. You of all people should get that." "Laura," I said again. I stepped toward her. I didn't reach out. You don't grab someone holding a hammer unless you want to get hit. I softened my voice. "Talk to me. What's going on?" She frowned and looked at the stake as if she'd forgotten it was there. "They needed anchors," she said. "Otherwise it slides." "What slides?" I asked, but I knew she was going to say it before she did. "The fence line," she said. "It wants to move. It doesn't like where it is. You felt it in your numbers. Why do you think you can't close the backside? It keeps sloughing." She made a rolling motion with her hands as if the land itself was shrugging its shoulders. "And every time it slides, someone falls out." The skin on my back went cold. "Falls out of what?" She looked at me with pity. "The way you'd look at a man who can't see something he should." "Out of here," she said simply, and then I dug for a second and the bottom was wrong. The dirt isn't right. It's thin, like a veneer, like painted cardboard. You can tell an old fence from a new one by the way the posts sit in the ground, right? She tapped the stake with the mallet and it rang, a hollow bell. This isn't right. I must have looked ridiculous standing there in my old boots holding a light like that could help. I'm a man who believes in lines and measurements. I like facts I can write in a book and come back to and they're still there. I wanted to tell her she was scaring herself, that the cicadas and the heat and the dark make people say strange things. I wanted to tell her to put the mallet down and get some sleep. And tomorrow we'd take a good shot off a different marker, and the world would settle the way the world often does when you give it daylight. She swung again before I could speak, driving the stake deeper until only 2 inches showed. The ground gave with a sound like a wet gasp, and the paler grass around us shivered hard like something had touched it from underneath. I stepped back without meaning to. Laura lowered the mallet and stood. "They don't want to hurt you," she said. "They want you to stop running. You keep leaving when it gets hard. You left Dad to die." She blinked hard. "You left Aunt May to die. You left her alone. You left your wife." That last part was just me bleeding in front of her. She didn't know the particulars of hospital waiting rooms and chirping monitors. She didn't have to. It landed where it needed to. I started, then didn't finish. There are words that don't help. She stepped toward me, and for a second I thought she was going to hug me. My chest went tight. Instead, she lifted the mallet in both hands and brought it down on the strap between 2 crosses, bending it into a deeper bow. The sound that came out of the metal was a groan that made my fillings ache. The fence line pulled not in inches but in the idea of itself, a tug I felt in my feet. "Stop," I said, and this time I reached for the mallet. She was faster than I expected. She jerked it up and sideways, and the headlamp's beam swung across her face. Her eyes looked like someone else's, someone who had been awake too long staring at something they couldn't name. She put the mallet between us like a crossing guard puts up a hand. "If you move," she said, "it slips." "You're scaring me," I said. "I'm not afraid of much anymore, but you're scaring me, Laura." She softened. For a second I saw my brother's kid again. "I'm doing this for you," she said, and there was real hurt in it. "So you'll stay?" I walked backwards, slow, palms out. The iron stake hummed under my boot sole, a vibration more than a sound. I wasn't thinking in words anymore, just in the old choices. Toward or away, speak or shut up, hold or let go. I turned and went for the truck. I'm not proud of running. I am alive because I did. The keys were in my pocket. My hand shook so hard it took 2 tries to hit the fob. I heard the hammer ring once behind me, then twice. I started the engine, and the sound of it felt like someone throwing open a door to air. I put the truck in gear and drove out of the hollow so fast I clipped a sapling and didn't stop to see if it snapped. At the mouth of the gravel road, the man in overalls stood again in the dark with a cigarette. The tip burned red as across his heart. He didn't flag me down. He didn't even look surprised. He watched me go like he'd seen it before. I slept in the cab in the parking lot of the gas station, the one with the flickering light. It hummed all night and made the bugs look like scraps of ash floating up from my hood. At dawn, I called the sheriff and said there was a family dispute up at Devil's Hollow, and someone was swinging a hammer around. They said they'd send a deputy. I waited long enough to make sure the deputy's car turned off the main road in the right spot. Then I drove home. This is where I lose a lot of people in the telling. I can hear the replies. "You left your niece. You left her to whatever that was." I called her phone every hour that day. It went straight to voicemail. I called the sheriff's department that evening and asked for the deputy who went out there. They said he didn't find anyone at the campsite, but he saw fresh iron in the ground and a bunch of old crosses that looked like a folk art project. He said he'd check again in the morning. He did. Still no one. They asked me if I wanted to file a missing person report. I did. She came back 3 days later like nothing happened. She texted me a picture of a coffee cup and typed, "Alive." That was it. No explanation. When I called, she let it ring and then texted again, "Don't call me." I respected that. I still do. She posts sometimes. Photos of hiking trails, of city murals, of a kitten on her lap. Nothing about Devil's Hollow. Nothing about me. I haven't seen her in person since. You can stop here and think I'm just an old man with a story he doesn't know how to hold. That's fine. But I kept the notebook from those days. Surveyors write everything down. We have to, or we betray the ground. About a month after I ran, against my better judgment, I drove back during the day with the notebook. I told myself I was going to finish what I'd started, close the line, clean the numbers. I told myself I'd do it alone. If you've ever watched a place move when it shouldn't be able to move, you know the flavor of the shock I felt when I stood where my tent had been and saw that the fence line didn't run where it ran before. I don't mean someone moved a post. The whole thing shifted, not yards, not something obvious enough for a before and after photo, but enough that the old corner cairn was now a foot inside the fence instead of outside. Enough that the strap bowed in the opposite direction in one spot, where I'd measured a neat chord the first time. My measurements from July didn't fit. They weren't wrong. They didn't apply. There were more crosses than before. Not dozens more. Just one in a place where there hadn't been one. It was newer iron. The welds were cleaner. The base was still damp where someone had tamped it hard. The crossbar cut into the vertical at a perfect 90. Too perfect for a hand that had learned under a smoky light. Someone had set it with a level. Someone like me. There was a name stamped into the horizontal bar with metal letters like you'd use for pipe. M. Ellery. I told myself I was reading it wrong. The E could have been a weird F. The double L could have been a divot. I ran my fingers over it and the letters were there under my skin. Not carved, stamped. My name. I looked around like a fool to see if someone was watching. Blackbirds tilted their heads at me from the fence. The cicadas were quieter in September, but you could still hear them in the trees like a memory of July. The strap hummed where it ran tight, like a plucked string on a bad guitar. My chest went tight the way it had when Laura lifted the mallet and looked at me for what she thought was help. I left again. I've never gone back a third time. I don't have a moral for you. I don't know what Laura did out there or what those crosses are for. I have a guess because guesses are what you sit with at 2 in the morning when the cicadas are gone and it's just you and your wife's coffee mug and the way the house sounds like a throat clearing before a confession. The guess is simple, they're not graves. They're anchors. I think that crooked little plot in Devil's Hollow holds something down. Not a monster. Not a sinkhole or a gas pocket. Something in the shape of a map that can slip if you don't pin it. People who lived there a long time ago figured that out the same way old folks figure out when to plant by the moon. Bad year, good year, pattern, fix. So they made an iron fence by hand and they kept adding to it and turning it and tuning it like a string until the land stayed put. Maybe it kept their creeks running where they were supposed to run. Or kept the road from bending into the wrong valley. Or kept them from walking out of their own lives. I think the fence moves because the world wants to slide. And I think the names on the crosses belong to the ones who held it in place long enough for someone else to make it to morning. If you're asking where Laura fits in, I don't know. Maybe she was chosen because she could hear the humming in the metal when the rest of us heard bugs. Maybe she chose herself because she didn't want to watch me run a third time. I do know she came back. And if there's a ledger somewhere that keeps track of who stays and who leaves, maybe her side has more marks in the right column than mine. Sometimes, when it's hot and the air in my house goes still, I swear I hear a long, slow scrape from the direction of Kentucky. It's probably the train that runs 3 miles east. Wheels on rails, the kind of sound you can mistake for anything you need it to be. I get up and check the locks anyway. That's funny if you know me. I've spent most of my life walking in places that aren't locked to measure things nobody notices until they're wrong. I avoided funerals when I could. I avoided hospital rooms. I've avoided more than I should have. You can say that's my flaw if you need one. I have a few. If you go there, and I don't recommend it, but I know someone always will, listen for the metal. If you hear it, don't go looking for the post that's asking for help. Don't grab a mallet because the sound bothers your teeth and your head and your heart. The iron doesn't need you. It will use you if you let it. If you stand very still, you might feel a little pressure under your boots like a low tide sucking at sand. If you feel that, think about everyone who didn't leave. Think about the ones who drove a stake into the dirt because something needed holding, and there was no one else. Then go back to your truck and keep driving until the air feels like air again. On a good day, I can tell myself the name stamped on that new cross was for some other Ellery. There are a lot of us. On a bad day, I can still feel the hum in my feet at 3 a.m., and I wonder if I'm already pinned and just haven't noticed. The world hasn't slipped out from under me since that summer. The roads go where they're supposed to. The house doesn't try to unmoor. Maybe I owe someone for that. Maybe that someone is a girl with hold fast on her wrist and mud on her boots that didn't match the road. I don't know what Laura heard that night in Devil's Hollow. I can guess. If they spoke like she said they did, if they said stay like a promise, you can call that a haunting if you want. I call it an offer, and I turned it down. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm telling you the shape of a fence and the weight of a hammer and the way a piece of iron can hum under your foot and make you feel like the ground is a lid. If I'm another name on a cross now, stamped neat and level, the only thing that makes sense is the line they taught me to repeat when I first learned how to read a deed and trust it. They're not graves. They're anchors, that's it. That's the whole story. If you ever find yourself in a hollow where the cicadas sound like a transformer, and the air sits so heavy it feels like someone's hand on your chest. Go easy. Don't touch the iron. Don't try to fix what was there before you were. And if you hear metal scraping, though nothing moves, pack up in daylight. Drive while it's still light. Don't wait for the hammer. Don't wait for someone you love to say, "So you'll stay," like she's offering you a chair. You can call me a coward. I won't argue. I'll only tell you what the old men told me when I started. The line is where you find it, not where you want it. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to walk away. Sometimes someone else does the holding. Sometimes the anchor has your name on it, even if your hands are clean. That's how I live with it. That, and the fact that the roads around here still take me home. For now. My name is Eleanor Bryce. I'm 47. I teach high school history, and until this happened, I would have described myself as normal in the boring sense. Grades, lesson plans, grocery lists, quiet evenings with the dog. I live in Greensburg, Kansas. If you've ever driven Highway 54 west of Wichita, you've seen what I see every day. Wheat fields that go on like a flat ocean, 1 or 2 grain elevators sticking up like chalk landmarks, and a sky that can look empty even when it's full of weather. People from the coast think that emptiness means peace, but when the wind never stops and the land has nowhere to hide, you learn peace can look like a face smiling at you through glass. This started the summer after my son left for college. The house had that hollow sound, like a shell you hold to your ear that keeps on holding you back. I filled the after-school hours by doing what I always told students to do. Go look for the missing pieces. I've collected local stories for years. Old newspapers, family lore, things teachers share in the break room. That summer, I decided to investigate one I'd written down years ago, the showpiece coffin in Haskell County. The story goes like this. In the 1920s, a traveling undertaker came through southwestern Kansas with a salesman's dream. A glass-topped coffin with a viewing window polished so fine you could kiss your reflection. The idea was that families could visit their loved ones and see the face as if asleep, without lifting the lid. People swore they saw the undertaker display it at a county fair. Nobody remembers which fair. An old clipping, more like gossip printed in a border, mentions a glass coffin demonstration near Satanta. Then dust storms came, the Depression came, and the undertaker disappeared. Some say he buried his showpiece on a farm he never owned and left without paying for his stall. Some say a body was inside it when it went into the ground. I wasn't looking for a corpse. I was looking for proof the story existed. Maybe a brass hinge or a pane, something I could show to my juniors when we talk about how small businesses hustled in those years. Haskell County isn't far. I drove there on a Wednesday in June. The road was empty except for trucks hauling grain. The fields were scratchy blonde. The wind smelled like dust and diesel. I had a printed county plat from the 1930s, a newer satellite map on my phone, and a name from a friend. Talk to Dale Ketterman, she'd said. He runs a big spread near the drainage canal. He knows every fence post, and he won't say no to a woman who laughs at his jokes. Dale answered his door with a smile he'd practiced in the mirror. He was in his 60s, thick-shouldered, wearing a cap from a seed company and a shirt with pearl snaps. He looked past me at my car like he was making sure I'd arrived alone. Then his eyes swung back to me in a way that said he'd decided I was harmless and maybe a little interesting. "You're the teacher," he said, "from Greensburg." "Yes, sir," I said, because sir is the currency that buys you 5 minutes in these parts. "I'm looking into a piece of local history. You ever hear of a glass coffin getting buried out here in the 20s? He chuckled like I'd offered him a slice of pie. "Well, that's a new one. Folks bury lots of things, bottles, hurt feelings. It would be close to an old fairground," I said, "or a demonstration field. Something where people gathered." He scratched his jaw. "We used to have a dem plot east of the Ketterman line. My granddad leased it out for corn experiments before they built the canal. My grandma had a nose for trouble, said the city men wore shoes too shiny for real work. You think something's there?" "I think something might have been," I said. "I can read maps and I can fill holes back in. I'm not looking to take anything but pictures." He grinned like the hook had found his lip. "You want to poke around, you poke around, Miss Eleanor. I'll walk you out. And if you get thirsty, I'll have a beer waiting." His farm paved the horizon. We walked out past a battery of grain bins and a ridge of windbreak trees. The fields rolled down toward an irrigation canal, a concrete cut running straight as a ruler. He told me about yields and weather and made jokes about city folks. I laughed where it was polite. The earth had that tough crust it gets after it bakes and then cools. The top layer almost like ceramic. You can't sink into it unless you break it. We came to a field that one of his hands had disked but not planted. It looked like a scab picked too early. A rusty sign near the ditch read, "Demonstration Plot Haskell Coag Extension." Letters so faded I had to tilt my head to read them. Well then? Granddad said they'd set up tents right there, Dale said, pointing to a flat patch near the sign. Folks would come watch seed drills and listen to men talk. Then everybody went home and did whatever their daddy did. That's how it is. Land teaches patience. I thanked him and asked if I could come back the next day with a hand trowel and a brush. He said sure, just check in with him. And don't go digging too deep, he added, smiling. Land doesn't like being opened up for no reason. I don't know if he thought that was flirty or wise. Out here, those things get mixed. I went back the next morning with a small pack. Trowel, brush, gloves, a notebook, water, and a flashlight I kept in my glove compartment. Old habit. I registered in the school's safety app out of force of habit, too. Fieldwork solo will text check-in. I texted my son a photo of the sky and told him good luck on Monday's lab. He sent a thumbs-up emoji I read too many times. By mid-morning, the sun already had a bite. I paced the flat patch near the old sign and started probing with the trowel. Not digging deep, just testing for anything that sounded different when metal tapped. Mostly it was dirt with a few small stones. Then about 30 feet from the sign, the ground went hollow under the blade with a little tink, like a spoon against the wrong part of a bowl. I cleared a hand-sized circle, scraping gently. Under the dust, I found something smooth. I wiped it with my glove and caught a sliver of my own face, warped like I was peeking through melted ice. It was glass, thick, not a bottle shard. A corner of it had a bevel. I sat back on my heels and tried to believe I wasn't imagining it. The flashlight in my pack was overkill for Kansas noon, but I used it anyway, shining down at an angle. The beam slid across the glass and caught the shape of brass rivets or pins along an edge. The glass wasn't separate. It sat on something. The soil around it gave slightly when I pressed, like a bread crust over a softened middle. I breathed through my mouth. The air smelled like dirt and something sweet underneath, like old perfume trapped in a grandmother's closet. That made no sense. I looked around without standing up, the way a rabbit looks before it decides whether to run. The fields were empty. A truck crawled along the road a mile off. The wind moved the wheat like hands smoothing hair. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures from different angles. Then I turned the flashlight off, covered the glass again, and walked back to Dale's to tell him I'd found a patch of something and ask permission to open more. He was in his shop where the cement floor kept it cooler. He was on the phone when I walked up. He saw me and hung up without saying goodbye. "Find yourself a lost diamond?" He asked. "I found glass," I said. "It's set into something. There are brass pins. It might be that coffin, at least the viewing window." I didn't dig past a hand's breadth, but I'd like to uncover more, carefully. His face went from careless to polite in a heartbeat. "Glass, huh? Huh. Maybe you ought to let that be an interesting rumor for your school children, Miss Eleanor. You start digging and you'll just find more dirt. I can open it up just enough to confirm and then fill it back. I'll make sure it's safe. I've done this kind of thing before." He rubbed his forearms with his hands in a way that made me think of spiders cleaning their legs. "I don't want a hole out there. You come out in the morning, land's cool, it makes room. By afternoon she's shifting and you step wrong, it clutches. You people don't understand that. Let the earth settle. I know how to shore a pit," I said. "I'll keep it small." He smiled, but there was no joke left in it. "You're polite, Miss Eleanor." Polite is not the same as listening. I thanked him anyway and left. A little thrilled to have found something, a little embarrassed by his scolding, and a little bothered by that smell of sweetness I couldn't place. I told myself he was worried about liability. Farmers think in those terms, even if they don't use the word. I went back out. I kept the hole small, clearing a rectangle maybe 2 feet long. The glass looked clearer where I brushed it. The bevel caught the light like a ring. I leaned close to look for cracks. That was when I saw the fog. At first I thought it was dust from my brushing, but the glass wasn't dusty. It was fogged from the inside. A thin veil of condensation had bloomed across it in a soft oval, like breath against a car window. I watched it for a long minute, telling myself the temperature difference between cool soil and hot air could do that, except the fog pulsed. It clouded and cleared, clouded and cleared, not like my breath would, but like something underneath had its own timing. I put my hand on the glass. It was cool and slick. Beneath that, a give that didn't feel like glass should feel. A soft resistance, as if a layer of rubber or cloth was pressed against it. I pulled my hand away and was instantly embarrassed, like I'd touched the wrong thing in church. It was noon. I covered the rectangle back up and drove to the library in town to see if I could find the clipping I remembered, something I could show to make this feel like history instead of a dare. The Haskell County librarian is a woman named Luann, who has a better memory than any database. She hadn't seen me in years, but she remembered a presentation I gave her teens about the 2007 tornado that took half my town. I told her what I was looking for, and she made a face that older women make when they want to be kind, but also want the truth to sit up straight. "You don't want to be out there alone," she said. "Not with him watching." "With who?" She pursed her lips. "Dale's boys are out fixing gates half the time, and he likes to drive around pretending he's checking pivots. He's always been protective of his land. You know how some people get with snow globes, wanting to keep them shaken? Some men have that with trouble." "I'll be careful," I said. "Do you have the county microfilm? Any mention of a coffin salesman?" She took me to a back room that smelled like the insides of books, cloth and vanishing glue. She loaded a reel and left me with it. In those old columns you learn how people lived by what they thought worth writing down. Who drove to Liberal to see a cousin, who sold a cow, who tripped on a curb and miraculously escaped injury. And then there it was, just a line. Demonstration fair to feature a modern memorial apparatus with viewing pane. Families invited to inspect. No date you'd frame, no address. But it existed. I printed the snippet and thanked Luann. She took my wrist as I turned to leave. "You be careful," she said. "He's the kind of man who doesn't like not being the one to find a thing." In my motel that night, one of those rooms that smell like lemon cleaner and a rusted air conditioner, I looked at the photos on my phone. In each of them, the glass looked like a puddle pretending to be solid. The fog in the brightest one had a crescent shape that suggested the edge of something close to the pane. Perfume hadn't been my imagination. When I held my shirt up to my nose, I could smell it. Stale rose and talc. Old-timey. The smell clung low like it was heavier than air. I slept badly, waking at 2:13, 3:40, 4:05. Each time I think I heard a truck idle outside. Each time when I parted the curtain, there was nothing but a sodium light that made everything look jaundiced. At 5:30, I gave up and dressed. I texted my son, "Good luck today," even though his lab was the following Monday. I told myself that was a mother's normal mistake. When I pulled into Dale's that morning, he was already out by the bins. He had a thermos and a look like he hadn't slept either. "Mornin', Miss Eleanor," he said without the slightest warmth. "You think on what I said? Let the earth settle." "I'll be careful," I told him. "I'll be in and out by noon." He stared past me toward the demonstration patch. "I had a coyote dig in a spot near there once," he said. "Critter about broke its own legs falling into the air pocket. You call me if you need a rope." "I will," I said, and smiled with all my teeth, so he'd know I wasn't intimidated. He smiled back like we were playing cards. Out at the hole, the soil had crusted over my brush marks, but I could still find my spot by the gently compacted square. I knelt and scraped, slower this time, almost cat-soft. The glass showed itself, the way a turtle does, suddenly there, not moving, watching. Today the fog wasn't a blooming oval. It was a smear, as if something had slid against the other side in the night. The scent rose even before I brushed it clean, roses and powder and something like old soap left in a dish too long. I told myself someone could have buried a doll or a mannequin, or that air pockets can move fine dust to make smears. This is what I do for my students. I narrate the ordinary first. But the smear had a shape that made every ordinary explanation feel threadbare. It looked like the heel of a hand might look if you pressed it lightly to a window and held it there until the warmth fogged an oval. There were lines within the smear, faint. One could have been a crease. One could have been a scar. One could have been nothing at all. I put my ear to the glass. I knew it was ridiculous, and still I did it, because ridiculous things are how you tell yourself the world is boring. Inside the glass, beneath the soil, there was a sound. Not a bump, not a scratch. A sound like a jar lid pulled and released. A pulse. It came every few seconds. It could have been the ground settling. It could have been a far-off pump. It could have been my own blood making a fool of me. I pulled back so fast I scuffed the dirt with my shoulder. I stood and looked around with both hands out like I was surrendering to an empty world. Nobody was there. The wheat moved, and the wind didn't apologize for it. At 10:30, a blue pickup stopped by the edge of the field. A young man got out. Dale's nephew, or a hand, I guessed. He waved and headed along the ditch as if he had business with a gate. He didn't look at me, but I felt watched anyway. I covered the glass and walked back to my car for water. When I returned, I could see boot prints in the dust I hadn't made. That afternoon, the fog kept forming on the glass. Every time I brushed it clear, I'd see my warped face and the beams of sunlight bending into the hole. Then the fog would creep back like breath. I told myself to leave it alone for the day and come back with a small camera I could wedge at the edge of the frame to record time and changes while I wasn't there. It felt too much like a game to do alone. So at 3 I stopped, packed my bag, smoothed the soil carefully, and went to tell Dale I'd be back the next morning. He stood by his shop with a hand on his hip and his head tilted like he was listening to a radio I couldn't hear. "How's your ghost glass?" he asked. "I want to set a motion camera for a day or two," I said. "Something small, no bigger than your fist." He shook his head and spat into the dirt like he was watering something that could survive on spit. "No motion cameras, I don't like them. They see what ain't supposed to be seen. This isn't for that." "It's not about trespassers," I said. "It's about science." He leaned in too close. I could see the spots on his jaw where he'd missed with the razor. "You hear me, Miss Eleanor? Let the earth settle." Behind him, the young man from the pickup, closer now, face plain and forgettable as a dime, watched us without moving. In some other world, I would have stood up straighter and told Dale exactly where he could put his pride. Out here, the smart thing is to smile and nod and live to argue another day. "Understood," I said. "I'll just look with my eyes." He stepped back. "You want a beer?" "I'm driving." He waited for me to thank him. I didn't. That night I drove back to my motel and then, after 10 minutes of staring at the ceiling, turned around and drove home to Greensburg. It was a long hour in the dark. I told myself I'd sleep better in my own bed. When I walked into my kitchen and flipped on the light, the dog, Tucker, trotted in, ears up, tail beating. I bent to hug him and smelled it again, a faint powdery rose like someone had just stepped out of my grandmother's bathroom. I checked the back door. It was locked. The windows were down the way I'd left them. I went room to room and found nothing but dust in the way my boy's door looked closed when it was open. I lay awake counting trains on the far track by the number of seconds their horns carried. 2 trains toward midnight, 1 closer to 3. At 4:20 I fell asleep. I woke to my phone buzzing, a text from an unknown number. "You at that hole today?" No name. 6:07 a.m. area code from here. I didn't answer. A minute later, another text. "Better let it settle. Things rise up when you let air in." I blocked the number. I'm not brave. I'm a woman who knows how quickly kindness turns. Still, I got in the car and drove back. When I turned down the road to Dale's, a county truck was parked crooked on the shoulder. I slowed. The driver had his hat low and didn't look up. At Dale's, no one was outside. I didn't see the blue pickup. I parked by the windbreak and walked out along the ditch. The sky was a mild white, no shadows yet. The field looked the way it always does until you look at the one place that doesn't. My neatly smoothed square was gone. In its place, a dark oval several yards long had sunk just enough to show it had been dug and filled. The edges were sloppy. One set of tire tracks had cut a scarf along the far side. I knelt. The soil was disturbed in the way bread is when someone presses it and lets go. A springiness that returned slowly. I brushed with my fingers where my glass should have been. Dirt, dirt, dirt. Hard pan below, hey, I said without meaning to say anything at all. The sound of my voice died. I walked the oval looking for shards, nothing, no glass, no brass pins, no imprint of a frame. They'd opened it and taken the whole thing in a few hours. I was sure of it. The way you know when a book has been taken off a shelf and put back 2 inches wrong. The surface looked quilted where shovels had lifted and dropped clods. There were boot prints, not mine, and something like drag marks. When I pressed my palm flat to the soil, the earth felt cool, then colder, as if something big below was sucking the heat out of me. I put my ear to the ground. Stupid. I did it anyway. Beneath the soil there was a sound. Not the jar lid pulse, not a machine. A long exhale, then a pause. Then another, shallow, like the first breath someone takes after coming up from too deep. I lifted my head, shaking. The smell of roses and talc rose so strongly I had to swallow. It came in a wave that had a shape to it, like the smell knew where it wanted to go. I stood. I turned in a circle. The wheat hissed. A crow called from the windbreak the way a laugh sounds when it hurts. The soil in the oval shifted, not much. I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been staring. It rose a 1/4 inch, then settled. A breath. I watched it do that 3 times, long, slow exhale, long, slow sigh. I backed away and stumbled on a hard clod and caught myself on my hands. When I looked up, Dale stood at the rim of the field like he'd been there a long time, hands in his pockets, face calm. "Let it settle," he said. "What did you do?" My voice sounded thin and angry and scared, like a wire being plucked. "Where is it?" "Nothing there to see," he said. "Nothing there for you. You dug it up." He smiled with no joy. "I'm a farmer, Miss Eleanor. I was out here before you were born, and I'll be out here after you go home. I put seed in and watch it like a preacher watches sin. Anything that wants to be above ground, I let it. Anything that wants to be below, I make sure it stays." "Who sent me those texts?" He tilted his head. "You give people a number when you ask for favors." I took a step toward him and the smell swelled again, so strong I tasted it, sweet and old, like kissing a bouquet kept in a refrigerator too long. The soil at my feet lifted, settled. Without thinking, I reached out and touched it with the tips of my fingers. It didn't feel like dirt. It felt like something underneath, loose but connected, like skin under a blanket. I yanked my hand back. I couldn't finish. "There's always something," he said. He came closer. "Let the earth settle. I don't remember deciding to leave. I remember walking backward and then turning, and then how the road felt too long. I got in the car and realized my hands were shaking so hard I had to rest them on the steering wheel until they calmed. I didn't look back until I'd driven half a mile. When I did, I could still see him standing there, small now, a stitch in the cloth. I went straight to the sheriff's office in town. I told the deputy who was there that I'd found something buried on private land that was of historical significance, and that I believed the landowner had disturbed it. The deputy listened without writing anything down. He looked bored until I said coffin, and then he looked annoyed. "You don't know that's what it was," he said. "I know what I saw. You poked a hole on a man's farm after he told you not to. Maybe he smoothed the hole. That's his right. What about the text?" He shrugged. "People text. Could someone be—" I almost said breathing. "Hurt down there?" He leaned back in his chair. "Ma'am, if you think there's a fresh body under the dirt, we'll get a warrant and dogs in half the county. If you think there's an old showpiece, that's not a law matter unless it has bones, and you don't know that. You need to take this up with the landowner like a neighbor." I started, then stopped. Nothing I could say would mean what I needed it to mean. On my way out, I passed the bulletin board where they post lost dogs and gun safety class flyers. There was a piece of paper taped in the corner announcing a farm safety day next month. The word "settle" was printed on it in big letters, part of some slogan about settling dust. It made my mouth taste dry. I didn't go back to Dale's. I went home, took a shower, washed my hair twice, threw my clothes in the washer with vinegar, and brewed coffee until the house didn't smell like perfume anymore. I told myself I'd stop there. I told myself the land would keep whatever it wanted to keep. And then the night started. The first night I woke at 3:11 to the sound of breathing at the foot of my bed. Tucker lifted his head and made that soft sound dogs make when they think you're telling yourself a story. The breathing was slow even. Not wind, not the refrigerator. The air smelled faintly of roses and talc, and some other note that wasn't smell so much as temperature, a coolness that touched my nose and throat. I turned on the lamp. Nothing there. I slept with the light on like a child. The second night I had a dream that wasn't a dream. I was at the hole and the glass was back and it had hands from the inside, palms flat as if someone wanted to push the sky away. When I woke, my palms hurt, like I'd been pressing them hard against something. A faint gray oval marked the inside of the bedroom window where my breath must have fogged it. Except I sleep with the window cracked and the oval was on the outside. On the third day, I stepped into my classroom to pick up some things I'd left, and the room smelled like my grandmother's bathroom again. The smell seemed to have a place it wanted to go, like it wanted to stand where I was standing. I packed my tote and left the door open a long time. When I locked it, the smell was in the hallway, thin and stubborn. I called Luann. I told her I was dropping the research project. She didn't ask why. She said, "He called me asking your last name spelled right, like he was spelling it to himself to see if it meant anything." I didn't give it. I took a leave from teaching in August. I told the principal I needed to resolve some personal matters. He nodded in the way men nod when they're glad you aren't crying in front of them. I sold 2 boxes of old paperbacks to the used bookstore and made 3 meals of soup that I forgot to eat hot. The perfume came and went. I stopped trying to catch it in the act. Some things want to be smelled and then be gone. We make ourselves sick searching for where they went. Twice, while getting gas on the edge of town, I saw the blue pickup from Dale's drive past slow. The young man at the wheel didn't look at me. He drove like he was escorting something no one was allowed to see. I tried to find out if any work crews had been out near the demonstration plot. I asked around at the co-op. Men looked at their boots and said they hadn't heard of any culvert repairs. I went to the county records office and asked about permits. The woman there had a sunflower on her thumbnail. She scrolled and shook her head. "No activity on Ketterman's parcels this quarter," she said. And then, looking at me in a way that wasn't unkind, "You know folks do things without paper when the paper doesn't help." I started going on long drives on roads without names. I thought if I could get tired enough, I'd sleep without dreaming that glass. I'd pass abandoned homesteads with 2 trees and a cistern, and a foundation that knew exactly how big the house had been. My mind kept writing a different shape there. Not a rectangle of rooms, but an oval underneath, like a lung. I'd cross a cattle guard and hear the clang under my tires and feel it answer from the ground. Not echoes, but something that wanted to sound like an echo, so I'd keep driving. Sometimes when I stopped at a field entrance to drink water, I'd smell that perfume and then fainter, but real. The scent of a man's aftershave, cheap and sharp. Dale's brand, maybe. I never saw him. I don't think he wanted me to see him. I think he wanted me to feel watched, to understand that there are things in this county you can look at and things you must pretend you can't. I got 3 more anonymous texts that month. "It's settled. Don't stir." And the last without words, just a photo. A stretch of wheat under a white sky. Nothing visible but horizon. And if you zoomed in until the pixels broke apart, a dark oval in the field like a coin pressed into bread. I deleted them and didn't. That is, I hit delete, and then pulled the pictures back from the trash and kept them. The way some people keep a locket with a clipping of hair they won't admit to themselves is morbid. I told no one whose opinion would hurt me to hear. My sister would have said with love, "This sounds like you grieving an empty nest." My son would have worried, and he has enough in his first year to worry about. Luann already knew enough to look worried all the time. I took my dog on slow walks and bought a new deadbolt and got used to the way quiet can sharpen you until you're a little dangerous to yourself. In September, the county fair set up its rides on the west edge of town, and one night I parked at a distance and watched the spinning lights from my car. Most of our fairs are the same as they ever were. The sound of teenagers daring each other gently, the smell of funnel cake and cattle, the way night makes everyone think their choices are harmless for a while. I thought of that 1920s undertaker setting up his display under a tent, polishing his glass to a shine. Did he bury his showpiece because he couldn't sell it? Because the land made him? Because someone told him to? Did he promise a family something he couldn't deliver and trade his problem for their silence? If you believe in hauntings, it's not the dead that do it. It's the promises. I haven't been back to the Ketterman place since the morning the soil breathed. At night, when the wind is out of the south and there's just enough moisture in the air, I'll catch the perfume again. Roses, talc, and that cool note that's not a scent so much as a memory of a basement. It passes through the house like someone meaning to leave who gets distracted by the pictures on your wall. I quit teaching. That's the part people ask about like it's the strangest detail. They think the story is the glass. It isn't. The story is what happens to you when you realize you've been giving tests about facts and missing the lesson about who gets to say what stays in the ground. I told my principal I wanted to work at the museum in Pratt part-time, and he said he hoped I'd find what I was looking for. I didn't tell him that was the first thing that had ever scared me, the idea that I'd keep looking anyway. It's November, as I record this. The wheat has a fuzz layer of new green that tricks you into thinking winter will be kind. I keep a flashlight by the back door and I still wake twice a week at 3:11 and listen. Tucker, who never used to sleep on the bed, does now. He puts his head on my ankle like a sandbag. When the perfume comes, I don't break the air by moving. I let it pass through. I say in my head with the one small stubborn part of me that isn't afraid anymore, I saw you. I won't dig. That's my bartering. I don't have a moral for you or a warning that fits on a bumper sticker. If you go out there thinking you can pull the lid off anything, you'll find out what I found. Sometimes the lid is looking back. And sometimes men like Dale keep their fields neat because neatness is the one lie the earth won't fight. I believe he took the coffin out and put it wherever he puts things he wants to know the location of, and no one else does. I believe he did it the morning after I found it, with a nephew and a skid steer and no paperwork. I believe he told the ground to settle and the ground listened mostly. There are nights when I wake and think I hear slow breathing under my floorboards, like the house took a deep breath and forgot how to exhale. There are mornings when the mirror fogs before the shower's even on. I catch myself drawing a shape on it with my finger, an oval, 2 small crescents at one end where hands might go, and then wiping it away before I can finish. Once, last week, I opened the back door to let Tucker out and the air on the porch was colder than the yard, like a body had just stood there. The smell of roses was strong enough to make me think of old fingertips touching fabric. Tucker walked to the edge of the yard and stood with his nose up. Not wagging, not afraid, just listening in that dog way that is older than ours. After a minute, he came back in without peeing, and I closed the door gently as if someone were asleep outside and we didn't want to wake them. I've told this the way we tell things on the internet when we want to feel less alone, how it started, what I did, what it did back. You can decide for yourself what you think was in that glass. Maybe it was a showpiece empty, the Undertaker's vanity. Maybe someone's daughter or wife or mother lay under there a long time ago and the earth learned her smell and kept it the way we keep a scarf. Maybe the land had its own idea of breathing, and it used her perfume to get my attention. I've read enough to know that sometimes we notice a pattern and call it a ghost because that's easier than knowing our noticing can make us part of it. What I know is this: the soil lifted and fell, and the sweet smell came with it, and the man whose land that is wanted me to look away. He succeeded. I looked away. I still see it when I close my eyes. I don't expect you to believe me. I expect you to go to sleep tonight and think about the air in your room and how it moves. Think about the layers under your feet, boards, joists, dirt, clay, and how they hold you up without you knowing their names. Think about the one place in your house that always feels colder or sweeter or hesitant, like it's waiting to be looked at but doesn't want to be found. You don't have to dig. Things that want to rise will, even if it takes them a century. No one tells you that when you learn history. They should. Sometimes I'll be washing a glass in the sink and the sunlight will hit it just right and my face will warp in the reflection. And I'll freeze with my fingertips inside the rim and feel the quick, hot prickle of a tear I didn't plan. That's when the smell comes again. Thin and patient like the memory of a woman who had manners even for ghosts. When it passes, I go back to whatever I was doing. I've gotten good at that. The earth teaches patience. If you ever drive past Haskell County in the summer with your windows down and think you smell roses when there's no garden for miles, don't panic. You're picking up what the wind likes to carry. Nothing's chasing you, not the kind of way you mean anyway. It wasn't the dead that scared me. It was what wanted to look back. I'm not posting this for views or subs or whatever dopamine hit I used to chase. If anything, I'm trying to talk myself out of what I think happened, by getting it down the way it actually felt. You can think I'm lying or click away or call me an idiot. I probably am an idiot. My name's Henry Calhoun. I'm 29. I used to run an urban exploration channel, the kind with thumbnails of flashlights and old stairs and red arrows pointing at, what is that? I'm the guy who laughs at chain link fences and no trespassing signs. The guy who tells you local myths are just background noise people use to decorate their fear. This starts at Dead Horse Bay, on the south end of Brooklyn, that spit of shoreline where the old landfill keeps bleeding out through the sand. If you've never been, the air is a permanent bruise of salt and rot. Glass bottles clink against each other like teeth. Bits of leather and bone and broken toys roll up with the tide, and the gulls sound like they're tearing laughter into pieces. It was late October, cool and metallic. I'd heard a storm had ripped the beach a little lower than usual and exposed something people were calling a forgotten burial. Not a full skeleton, just a hint. That was the phrase used in a couple of posts. A hint. I wanted to be the first clean video up with the title "Forgotten Burial Exposed by Tides." Police called. That's the kind of awful person I was. I told my friend and occasional producer, Mara, to meet me by the bridge, but she had a migraine, so I went alone. Typical. Dead Horse Bay doesn't care if you're alone. The bay wants you quiet either way. On camera, I was my usual hyped-up self. Off camera, I kept my hands in the pockets of my jacket, because the wind bit through the seams. I remember the tide already on its way out, the water pulling strings of foam from around my boots. And the smell, it's not something you get used to. It sits behind your face, like you're breathing through an old sponge. I filmed the usual long shots. The bottles stacked like glass barnacles on the pilings, a kid's shoe with the leather unzipping itself, rusted springs, a porcelain doll head that looked surprised to have survived a century. Then I did my hero walk toward the place the posts mentioned, an old tire half buried near a crushed metal drum. I didn't find a skull. I didn't find even a rib or a phalange. I found a tooth. It was there at the edge of the wet sand where the next wave would have covered it. I know how a tooth looks, even if the only exposure I've had is the dentist and my own nightmare about molars crumbling. This was a human tooth. A canine, slightly curved, and it was clean. Not just rinsed by the ocean clean. It had that smooth chalk enamel sheen like it had been boiled or pulled free a second ago and rinsed under a tap. I laughed on camera. I said something like, "Oh, well, there you go. I found your buried treasure." Then I said, "I'm putting it back. Because even I know not to pocket actual human remains, and because I thought maybe a cop watching later would appreciate my respect for the dead." I set it exactly where I'd found it, pressed a little sand over it with 2 fingers, and kept moving. I only got 10 minutes of footage on that first trip. It wasn't the most cinematic day. Wind noise, gulls, trash, fine. I headed back to my car and popped the card into the laptop to check, my framing, my voice, whatever. There were only 2 clips on it. A 30-second intro and some B-roll of the bridge. The files I'd just recorded, walking the shoreline, talking about the burial, weren't there. I thought I'd hit the wrong button. My fault. Annoying, but it happens. I went back 2 days later. This time I brought Mara, who wore a hoodie pulled so tight she looked like a sad cartoon monk, and a second camera so we'd have redundancy. The tide was again on its way out. The light clipped along the tops of bottlenecks poking out of the sand like a crowd of tiny periscopes. We found the tire. We found the drum. And there, right where I'd put it back, was a tooth. I told myself I was seeing the same one and the tide had just shifted it. But the sand around it wasn't disturbed. The tooth sat on a little shelf like it had been placed. Clean. Perfect. I picked it up with the corner of my shirt, showed it to Mara, who said, "You don't," like we were 14 again. I put it back again, this time pressing it deep and smoothing the sand until you couldn't tell anything had been touched. We recorded for almost an hour. I remember a couple walking their dog down the beach. The dog kept sneezing and shying away from the water like it was hot. An old guy in a fishing hat stood ankle deep and didn't cast a line the entire time. He kept looking at the same notch in the horizon like he'd see the pass come through it if he stared hard enough. We did a second pass from the bridge down to the same spot, in case I'd missed anything. When we got back to the car, my camera had 3 files. The first minute, a clip of me saying we're back at Dead Horse Bay, and 9 seconds of nothing but a static frame of wet sand. Mara's camera had 6 files. 5 played fine. The 6th was labeled the same time code as the stretch where we talked about the tooth. It wouldn't open. The thumbnail was black. The file size said 666 KB, which was a joke the universe didn't need to make. "Probably corrupt," Mara said. "SD cards die." "Both?" I asked. "It happens. Except it doesn't. Not like that." I decided to go back alone the next morning. The idea was to do a short, simple run-through. No exposition, just show the location and call it a day. I told myself I was being precious about a beach with junk on it, and that was pathetic. When I got there, the tide was lower than I'd ever seen it. The bay had exhaled. An extra 10 feet of wet, ribbed sand sat exposed, shining like the back of something alive. I stood at the waterline and listened to the hiss of it pulling back. There was a tooth on the sand in front of me, not at the tire. Not by the drum, just in front of me, as if someone had rolled it across the wet and the water had stopped it at my boot. I didn't touch that one. I walked on and found more, a breadcrumb trail of enamel, canines, incisors, a molar with a little silver filling that caught the light. Every single one was clean. I told the camera I was following the path because I was curious. That part's on the footage that survived. I didn't tell it that my mouth had started to water, or that my tongue kept checking the edges of my own teeth like I expected to find a gap. The trail led me back to the tire, the drum, the place I'd been. I set up for a wide shot. I got down on my knees and pushed at the compacted wet sand with my hands. It sucked at my fingers. When I pressed my ear close to the ground to check if I was hitting rock or junk, the microphone hanging by my cheek picked up something I didn't hear then, but I heard later during editing. Breath. Soft, patient breath like someone sleeping with their lips just parted. Not wind, not wave. Breath. I dug until my knuckles were raw. My nails got packed with black grit. The hole wasn't much, a foot across, 6 inches deep. The sand kept trying to level itself like it didn't like the idea of an opening. I paused to pick the grit out of my nails and the water seeped in, warmer than it should have been even in October. That was the first time I felt the temperature against my skin and thought, why is it warm? When I pulled a clump of sand free and the next layer slid away, I saw the curve. At first I thought it was a piece of wire. Then I thought it was a length of pale rubber hose because it had that soft bend to it. Then my brain caught up with my eyes and said jawline, human, the arc of it. The place where the mental protuberance would turn into the chin. The roots of teeth embedded in it like white stone sunk in mud. Except the bone wasn't brittle. When I pressed the back of my knuckle to it, it gave. It wasn't mushy, it was pliant. Like something preserved in brine. Like a thing kept on a shelf inside the ocean waiting its turn. I didn't pull it out. That would have made this a different story, and probably a different set of crimes. I covered it again. In the footage, I can hear myself exhale, long and shaky, and say, okay, I'm done. This was stupid, I packed up. I carried the camera like a newborn. I didn't look back. At home, I washed my hands for 15 minutes and watched the water go black around my knuckles and then clear and then black again, as if the dirt were arriving late. I plugged in the camera, 2 files, an intro where I say I'm back, and a clip of waves. I checked the audio track on the wave clip. My software pulled a waveform that had an odd, slow rhythm and a dampened frequency range. I boosted it out of curiosity. The hiss folded open like a curtain. Underneath, soft and regular, was breathing. I've edited enough to recognize the sound of lungs moving. This was close to the mic, closer than my own mouth would have been if I'd whispered. I took a shower. The water felt too warm. The steam smelled like low tide. That night I had the dream I always made fun of other people for posting. I'm on the shoreline. There's someone sleeping under the sand, sleeping, not dead. This person is breathing and their breath is the tide. Every exhale pulls the sea roar out of the glass and junk. Every inhale draws it back. Their mouth is full of clean teeth and there's no skin on their face except for the lips. I'm kneeling with my fingertips just resting on the sand while it rises with each breath, and I can feel the warmth through the pads of my fingers, and I can't tell if it's coming from the sand or from my own hands. When I woke up, my gums ached, not like I'd clenched my jaw, like I'd been chewing something tough in my sleep. I pressed my tongue against my incisors and felt a moment of electric, nauseating relief that none of them were loose. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I told myself that out loud. Then I got in the car. The beach had more people this time, scavengers hunting for old bottles, a pair of teenagers kicking at a rotted sneaker, the fisher in the hat again, standing with the water around his ankles and not moving. I set up way back near the grass. I told the camera exactly what I'd done, what I'd found, where I'd found it. I kept my voice flat. I didn't try to make a moment out of it. I said, "We're going to show it as it is." I walked to the tire and the drum like I was approaching a sleeping dog. There was a tooth sitting on top of the tire, a molar with a black dot in the middle of the occlusal surface like a pupil. It hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. Other people had passed by. I put the molar down in the sand and said, "I'm not touching this. That clip doesn't exist. What exists is me standing by the grass, talking to the camera about historical landfill layers, bottle dates, the way time stratifies itself like a layered cake, and then a jump cut to my hand, wet and shaking, holding a clean, perfect tooth. I don't remember picking it up. I don't remember stepping to the waterline and letting the waves run over my boots while I held the tooth under the surface, as if I were rinsing it. The audio has no wind in those 2 minutes, no gulls. Just a slow, regular breath that isn't synced to mine. Mara called me that night. "Hey, you good? You sound weird in your texts." I told her I was fine. I told her I was editing. I told her I was probably going to scrap the whole Dead Horse Bay thing because it had bad vibes. And I said it like a joke and heard my own voice echo out from the joke. Empty. That's when I got the email. The subject line was, "You don't know me, but I think I know that sound." The sender was named Samuel Rhodes. He said he was a wildlife biologist who worked out of Louisiana until recently. He said he'd heard the audio I'd accidentally posted because apparently YouTube had glitched and uploaded a 30-second short from my draft. Just waves, that slow breathing under them. He said it made his hair stand up because he'd recorded something like it without trying, months before, and that he had been stuck not talking to anyone about it until he saw my clip. I don't hand out my number to random emailers. I did with Sam. He sounded older than me in the way a voice can sound like it's standing in a different kind of weather. He said, "I'm not a storyteller. I don't have a channel. I tried to write it up for my department after the first field season, and I got told it wasn't measurable. That it was effective, but your sound, it's the same animal." I laughed and asked what animal he meant. He didn't laugh. He told me about Tunica Bend. It's a stretch along the river, northwest of Baton Rouge. Bottomland forest, old levees, the kind of place that drinks you all day and gives you nothing back. He said he was there to monitor erosion near some plantation ruins. Lot of history, lot of sinking. First week there, I find this little mound out in the bayou muck, he said, rounded like somebody had put a shoulder under the mud and taken a breath. I told him that was a wild metaphor for a scientist. He ignored it. I thought it was a gas bubble. Happens all the time with decaying plant matter. Thing is, there weren't any gas lines, no old pipes. I checked the survey maps. Nothing there. And except for a few small burps, it didn't pop. It just kept itself. He told me he marked the mound with flags and checked it every day. Every day it was a little bigger, like the mud was inflating from beneath. He camped nearby for a week. He said at night he'd lie in his tent and hear the bayou all around him like a wet clock. The mosquitoes whining at the mesh. His own breath amplified inside the tent because there's nothing else to listen to. And underneath that, a slow inhale, exhale. He told himself it was his own heartbeat pitching the sound or the wind moving reeds. But when the air went still, he said, the sound kept going. Like something under me was breathing and didn't need to share my weather. I asked him if he'd recorded it. He said yes. I heard him click around on his end. He played me a clip from his phone. The hiss of insects, the faint ping of something dripping, and then that same patient bellows-like motion in the low range. Breath. Close. He went back every morning. The mound was taller by an inch or two each time. It got to where the surface thinned out, he said. You could press a palm to it and feel the give. Warm, too. The rest of the mud was cool. That spot had heat under it. He paused like he was deciding whether to tell me the next part. On the 5th night, I woke up to the whole swamp taking a deep breath. I pictured him alone out there, his tent a damp lung of its own. It stormed the next evening, he said. Not a hurricane, just one of those angry, loud tantrums. The rain came in sideways. I had a tarp up, but it filled and dumped. I went out to check that my gear hadn't floated. The mound had slumped down like a collapsed souffle, and there was a hollow where the core had been. 10 feet long, shoulder to shoulder, shaped like a person who'd been pressed into mud and then taken out again, only nobody had taken anything out. It was a cavity, Henry. The mud walls were slick and warm. The water inside it was warm. And it wasn't just rainwater either. It had that cooked earth smell. If you stood over it, you could feel your chest trying to match it. Like you were being paced. He said he left that night. He said he got halfway to the highway before he pulled over and threw up in the weeds. He said when he wrote it up, the department told him he'd misinterpreted natural gas bubbles. He said he knew gas. This wasn't that. It's going to sound ridiculous, he said, but I think the ground, land, bay, whatever you want to call it, keeps a memory, not just of what was put in it, but how it felt to have it, to hold it, and sometimes it keeps practicing. He took a breath. I left academia not long after. Couldn't stand going through the motions. I can't stand baths now, too much stillness. His laugh then was the sound of a man hearing himself from the outside. Anyway, I heard your clip. I thought, I know that breath. I know that. Patience. We talked for an hour. He told me about a little cemetery near the ruins with subsiding graves, the way the names on the stones had sunk so the words were hard to read. He told me about waking with the taste of iron behind his teeth. He didn't ask me what I'd found. Not directly. He's a biologist. He knows how you chew your own story until you can swallow it. After we hung up, I opened my project file and listened to my waves again. The breath was there, pacing me, not caring whether I acknowledged it. I decided to cut a short video. No voiceover, no arrows, just ambient shoreline, a few shots of the bottles, an overlay of that low, sleeping bear exhale. I'd put up 1 minute and say I'd be back with more, which was a lie, but that's how you end a video. I exported. It failed at 99%, twice. On the third try, it exported. I clicked play to do a final check. The beach rolled. The bottles clinked. A tooth sat in the lower left of the frame that hadn't been there when I shot the clip. I scrubbed back and forth. The tooth was in frame the whole time, although I knew exactly where I'd been standing, and there had been nothing on that patch of sand except a cigarette butt. I'd been careful to keep trash out of the beauty shots. The tooth didn't shine or wink or anything dramatic. It was just present, clean as an index card. I didn't upload. 2 mornings later, I woke up with my jaw aching and my tongue pressed against something sharp at my molar. I rolled out of bed and went to the mirror. One of my fillings, an old silver one, had a hairline crack in it, like a dried stream bed. My gum around that tooth was red. The taste in my mouth was like I'd stuck my head underwater at Dead Horse Bay and sucked in the first wave. I made an appointment with my dentist. He said stress can do weird things to your bite. He smoothed the filling. He told me to relax. I didn't tell him that salt made my gums hum. I kept editing around the breathing, pretending I could cut it into a trick of the wind. The audio software crashed. When it came back, the waveform on the breath had shifted forward by a few seconds, as if it wanted to be earlier in the story. I dragged it back. It slid forward again. I deleted the track I saved. I went to the bathroom. When I returned, the track had reappeared, saved as miclav2breathfinal.wav. Mara came over after work to talk me out of my own head. We ate takeout with the windows open to let the apartment breathe. When she laughed at something dumb I said, her breath fogged the glass. I watched the fog stick for 1 second longer than her exhale should have allowed. She saw where I was looking and rolled her eyes. Tell me you didn't go back again. I told her I was done. I meant it when I said it. That night I dreamed of the bay holding its breath. The whole shelf of water pulled flat and tight like a sheet. Under it, everything leaned inward, like people bending over a cradle to see if the baby would wake up. When the bay finally exhaled, the wave rolled back so far I could walk the bottom for miles, and teeth glinted there like shells, and a jawline rose through the silt with the patience of a hand lifting through a blanket. I woke up to my phone buzzing. It was an audio message from Sam. No words, just a recording. Rain on a tent. Thunder far away, and then the long, careful breath in and out like someone practicing sleeping. At the end, his voice, he's small. It's not what was buried that mattered. It's what the earth wanted to keep. I don't know if he meant that as comfort. I didn't go back to Dead Horse Bay. I said that earlier, and I kept it. The smell of salt makes my gums ache now. Subway pretzels, ramen, even the steam off a dishwasher. I feel it in the roots of my teeth like an itch I can't scratch. I take short showers. I don't put my face under. I swish mouthwash and spit it out right away because the antiseptic mint tastes like the end of a tide. Sam and I still talk sometimes at odd hours like we're apologizing to whatever lives between our time zones. He told me he tried to visit that mound again after the storm season ended. The flags were gone. The ground was flat except for a place where the surface gave a little when he stepped there, as if something beneath it had remembered the shape of a person and then forgot what it was waiting for. I didn't upload the Dead Horse Bay video. I stopped uploading anything. The channel's still up because in a way it feels worse to erase it, like I'd be trying to rewrite whatever my piece in this was. Every so often I get an email from a subscriber asking if I'm dead. I always type, just taking a break. Then I delete the draft. Last week someone DM'd me a picture from the bay. An empty, clean jawline half revealed in the sand. Lips gone, but the curve sitting easy like it had settled. Their caption said, "Dude, you missed out." I looked at it for a long time. It could have been staged. It could have been a pig jaw. It could have been Photoshop. Or it could have been the bay coughing up a little memory because it couldn't help itself. I'm writing this now because I walked past a fish market, and the smell of salt and old ice and wet rope hit me, and my gums throbbed and my tongue felt too big for my mouth. And in that second I heard it again, the slow, patient breath, the one the microphone caught better than my ears. It doesn't sound like a monster. It doesn't sound like a threat. It sounds like practice. Like a body remembering the 36 muscles it takes to smile and doing the set in the dark, over and over, until the light returns. You can say that's just my brain. You can tell me stress screeched my SD cards and cracked my filling. You can say Sam's cavity was a coincidence and my waveforms were software artifacts. You can say I wanted to find something and then I did. I know what it felt like to kneel on that wet sand and press my hands against a surface that was warmer than the air, warmer than my palms, as if the heat was rising, not falling. I know what it felt like to touch that pliant arc and have my own jaw answer. A residual echo like when you see someone yawn and you can't help yourself. I know what it felt like to picture another place hours away, where the mud took the shape of a body and kept it through a storm until it couldn't anymore. I quit uploading. I take the long way home to avoid the bay. When I pass the ocean now, my tongue tries to memorize my teeth like a man tapping out a prayer he only half believes. If you go to Dead Horse Bay, don't take anything. Don't leave anything either. It's not a swap. If you feel the ground warming under your hands, stand up. If you hear breath in the wind, walk away. That's just my advice from one idiot to another. I don't think there's a ghost out there. I don't think there's a monster. I think there's a memory in the land itself, a muscle none of us knew was still attached. Flexing, and I think it misses what it used to hold. I didn't set out to chase a myth. I set out to film trash and a rumor of a burial. I came home with an ache in my gums and a tinny sound in my files. And a sentence that won't leave me, like tide water staying inside your ear. Something down there still remembers being alive. My name is Ruth Mayfield. I'm 62, I used to be a nurse, and now I sit with dying people for a living. Or a calling, or a habit I can't quit. I don't dress it up much anymore. I make coffee, I straighten quilts, I count breaths. Some folks want a hand to hold. Some want the television loud. Some keep their eyes on the door like they're expecting someone better than me. I lost my faith after a night shift 20 years ago, and it's never found its way back. The work stayed, though. I suppose that says something about me. Or maybe it says something about death. It doesn't care whether you believe in it. This isn't a sermon. It's a story about a graveyard behind a derelict church down in Barrow County, Georgia. If you've ever driven the old county road south of Winder on a summer evening, you know the way cicadas can sound like a fuse burning to its end. You know honeysuckle vines can smell sweet and rotten at the same time, especially where they crawl over fence posts nobody's tended in years. You know the way heat presses a hand between your shoulder blades and stays there, firm as a nurse reminding you to breathe. I went out there in August, the year after my friend Eunice died. The church is called Fieldstone Baptist, though near as I can tell it hasn't held a service since around the time I stopped believing in anything. The name makes sense if you see it. Pale gray stones lifted right out of the ground and mortared into walls that slump like tired men. The front steps are cracked. Kudzu and blackberry canes are fighting the frames of the stained glass windows and losing. Glass wins quietly. You can see where lightning hit the bell tower once and nobody bothered to fix it. There's a shallow dip in the roofline, a little crooked smile against the sky. I went because Eunice liked it out there. She always said the world felt quieter after the railroad tracks, like your thoughts finally had space to breathe. She wanted to be buried somewhere that didn't have those fake granite vases screwed to the headstones. I want a place that can swallow me back up if I'm not careful, she used to say. And we'd laugh because she never was careful. We were hospice volunteers together, then just friends, then two old women who had outlived most of the people who called us by our first names. When she took a turn, her daughter asked if I'd ride out with the funeral home and make sure the grave was where Eunice had picked it. It was. I laid a sprig of rosemary by her hand. I said goodbye in the practical way I know, by checking the work. After that, I visited once a month with grocery store flowers. I never stayed long. I don't talk to stones. I tidy, I notice, I leave. It's the same rhythm I had on the nursing floor and later in living rooms, just slower and outdoors. With cicadas like static and tire grit under my shoes. I don't fear cemeteries. They're inventory, not mystery. The last visit started like the others. A grocery bag on my wrist. The church gate squealing like a piglet. The smell of honeysuckle and damp soil and something sweet that turns your stomach if you breathe it too deep. The late sun sat orange in the trees and the grass was high enough to wet my socks. The stones leaned every which way. Eunice was by the third crepe myrtle, the one that had more berries than leaves. I sat on the slab edge and brushed pine straw off her name. I told her, because I say things out loud even when I'm alone, that the Henderson boy down the street from me had finally fixed his muffler and that the cats were catching cicadas like they were birds. I said I'd brought sunflowers because she always liked the faces. I set them in an old jelly jar and pushed it into the dirt so the wind wouldn't knock it over. I don't know why I looked toward the back fence. Maybe a peal of cicadas jumped an octave. If you've lived with them, you know the way they do. Or maybe the smell shifted, rot to sugar. There's a far corner where the mowed grass gives up and the land dips toward a run of blackberry brambles. Past that is just field and a split rail fence that's more memory than wood. I saw something white back there, a flare against the green. I thought it was an upturned 5-gallon bucket at first, some groundskeepers cast off. Then the angle caught me right and I saw the polish on it, and the way the evening sun squared itself on the surface. It was a stone new enough to still look wet. Now in most cemeteries, new markers aren't remarkable. People die every day. Stones get set in neat rows and families cry and you keep moving. But fieldstone isn't neat. It isn't anything. Nobody new had been added in years other than Eunice. And that was only because she made arrangements with a deacon whose name I never learned. If a new stone showed up back there, it was because someone had brought it in quiet and left it in the back corner where nobody would ask questions. I walked toward it. The cicadas hitched a little and then started up again. Bees worried at the blackberry flowers. The honeysuckle smell was thicker back there, like someone had mashed it under their heel. The stone was smaller than most, simple, not a lot of money in it. I could tell because I've seen what families can and can't afford. It had that chalky sparkle that fades as the rain seasons it. There was no name, no verse. No beloved father or gone to glory. Just a date, fresh cut. So sharp the numerals could cut your fingertip if you traced them. The date was that day. I stood there with my mouth open like I'd walked into the wrong room. There's a trick your brain plays when it bumps into something that shouldn't exist. It starts narrating. Like if it can name the parts, it can unmake the wrongness. New stone, no name. Today's date. Maybe a family lost someone suddenly and didn't have time for an inscription. Maybe the engraving came later. Maybe. But I know how long these things take and who gets called in what order. No funeral tent had been set. The dirt around the base wasn't disturbed. It looked like someone had placed a marker for an event that hadn't happened yet. I told myself it was a prank. Teenagers. We get our share of that out there. I said it out loud in that voice I use for patients who wake up confused. It's probably nothing. Then I turned to go. Because nothing good gets better. When you keep looking at it, my car wouldn't start. It's an old Taurus with a new battery. Because I replaced the last one in May, and I remember the date because I put it on my calendar like I put down everything these days. If it matters, it gets ink. The light stuttered. The radio coughed and died. When I turned the key, there was that dry clicking that sounds like teeth chattering. I know this sound. It means you're not going anywhere in a hurry. The parking pull-off at Fieldstone is a patch of sand and glass half hidden by sumac. There's a little service road on the far side that you could imagine a mower once used, but no one has been mowing. I keep roadside assistance because you have to be practical in this world. Even when you don't believe in much, you can believe in a tow truck. I called. The signal out there is trash, but the call went through and the dispatcher had that clipped, cheerful voice like she could take care of you as long as you told her the cross streets. Fieldstone Church Road, I said, near the dead train tracks. She laughed like I was making a joke and told me it would be a bit. That's how she said it. Not a time, a bit. I could hear her typing. I could hear a television in the background, something canned and happy. I went back to the gate because inside the yard is shade and outside is heat that wants to climb your spine. And then I felt, forgive how vague this sounds, like a picture is better than the language. Imagine you're in an empty house and somewhere far down the hall a door you didn't know was there just opened. You didn't see it, but you know the change in air. You know when a space gets company. That's the best I can do. I was alone, but I wasn't. I told myself it was just the way dusk pulls a place into itself. Shadows look like people if you want them to. Bugs hit your neck just so and you think of a hand. I stood by the gate and watched the sun soak into the trees and tried to count deep, like I used to tell my patients to do when the morphine kicked too hard. When the tow truck finally turned in, white cab, young driver with a cap pulled low, a dangling pine tree air freshener. That didn't help. The sky had gone copper at the edges. He said his name was Joel. He had a friendly face and jittery hands and kept looking over my head into the yard like he expected someone else to walk out. I told him about the battery. He tried the hood and I saw the moment he realized I was right. "We'll get you jumped," he said. He hooked up the leads and the Taurus came back to life like a stubborn old heart remembering its beat. When he disconnected, he paused and sniffed. "You smell that?" He meant the honeysuckle. He didn't know it has 2 lives in its scent. "Smells like summer," he said. I said it smelled like something stuck between a kitchen trash bag and a wedding bouquet, and he laughed like I'd said something clever. Before he left, he glanced past the crepe myrtles and his face changed. "You folks put in a new stone?" he asked, like you folks meant anyone other than me. I hadn't told him about it. I hadn't meant to. The question found its own way out of him. "I don't know," I said. "I'm not the church." I went home. I made the kind of dinner people in my position make. Tuna on toast, a sliced tomato. And I put my phone on the charger because you grow careful when the world reminds you it can strand you. I slept poorly, which isn't unusual. I set a glass on the nightstand and woke once to find the sweat on it had made a ring the shape of a coin. You start noticing shapes after a while. It's a trick of fear. For 3 days I didn't go back. I told myself I owed Eunice a fresh jar and that I'd left her with the stone and the wrongness. I told myself a lot of reasonable things. On the 4th morning, I baked banana bread because the bananas had gone past the point of good company, and because baking has measurements, and measurements can fix things. When it cooled, I wrapped a slice for Mrs. Cole next door and another for the churchyard because I am still the kind of person who brings offerings to places, even if I don't pray. At lunch, I got in the Taurus and headed down the road I could drive blind. The cicadas were louder. The heat was a hand again, not mean, not kind, just present. At Fieldstone, the jelly jar had tipped anyway. The sunflowers had gone brown and were feeding ants. I set the new jar. I brushed Eunice's name again because it felt wrong not to. Then I looked toward the back because trying not to look is its own kind of looking. I told myself I just needed to confirm the prankstone had been picked up by whoever put it there. I started walking before I finished the sentence. I saw it from halfway. It still sat square and out of place, white as a tooth. I felt something sour turn in me. I thought I'll leave after this. I'll go home. I'll stop visiting a place that can't decide if it belongs to the living or the dead. But then I noticed there were 2 stones. The second was not right behind the first, but off to the side, like someone had placed it in conversation with the other. It was not as white. Already in 3 days it had taken something of the air. Or maybe the trick of light made it seem so. It had a name, and I knew the shape of those letters before I made myself read them. It had dates. It had mine. I am not a screamer. Not in the way you think. I have held the hands of men whose hearts were bruised fruit, of women who looked at me and said, "Is this it?" And I have nodded because it was. My body did not know how to make a sound for what I felt. It did something else instead. It closed tight like a fist. My knees went first. I sat down in the grass and it was sticky and warm and I could hear every insect in the county. My face tingled. I thought of the practical steps because that is my refuge. Check the stone. Check the dates. Check your own name as if there might be a middle initial wrong. Check for camera tricks, for paint, for the simple explanation that will put the world back on its hinges. It said Ruth Elaine Mayfield, just like on my driver's license. The birth year was right. The end date was not today, and that was worse somehow. It was 4 days from then. Someone had placed a bet on me and they'd put it in stone. I touched it. It was cold despite the sun. There is a particular cold the freshly carved stones keep. like the quarry won't let go all at once. My fingers went numb in the tips the way they did when I worked the med freezer and forgot to put gloves on. I looked for seams where a nameplate might be switched later. There were none. I looked for unfinished bits at the base. There were none. I looked for the marks a truck's dolly leaves in dirt, a scuff line 2 tracks together like a prayer. There was barely anything. Someone had been careful. Someone had been deliberate. I will say this much. I would have left then if my car had started. I would have left if the cicadas had not gone silent 1 layer at a time until I could hear the shape of my breath, like it had edges I could cut myself on. I would have left if the air had not cooled the way it does when a storm is standing in the next county watching. But there are things you learn after enough rooms. Enough bedsides. The world will keep pressing you in the place that hurts until you decide who you are. I went looking for the groundskeeper. Fieldstone doesn't have one in any official sense. There's a man who lives in a trailer back up the road who mows a path every few weeks when he can. The old ladies from New Pilgrim drive over with clippers once a summer and leave a cooler of sweet tea. A deacon from somewhere checks on things when he remembers. I have seen them all in passing, the way you see people who help out of habit. That afternoon, nobody was there. The church door was chained. The windows were the same cracked colors. The bell hung and didn't ring. I could hear a truck on the highway. I could hear a blue jay swearing in the trees. I could hear something that might have been a shovel sunk into earth somewhere you couldn't see. I went back to my car. It started. The relief made me ugly. I left too fast. Gravel pinged under the fenders like someone throwing pennies at me. I drove to Deaton Creek Hardware because if there's a place in this world where questions still get answers, it's where people buy twine and masonry nails. The owner, Mr. Cleveland, knows everything about everyone because he sells to all of us. He was at the counter with his little black dog and a roll of receipt paper that had jammed. "You look like you've seen something," he said. I said I had. I asked who had been setting stones at Fieldstone. He made a face like I'd asked who'd moved his coffee cup without permission. "Nobody," he said. "Not unless the angels are doing it." I told him about the nameless stone. I didn't tell him about mine because I wanted to see his reaction without feeding it. He shrugged in that big-shouldered way of his. "Old places draw old habits," he said, which did not feel like an answer. "Kids never could leave the dead alone," I said a little too loud. "This isn't kids." The dog stood up and barked because people can hear the pitch change even when they don't know what to call it. Mr. Cleveland held up both hands. All right, he said. "I'll call Deacon Earl. He's the one got a key to that chain. He'll know if someone's been out there," he called. The phone rang and went to a voice that said a name too quickly for me to catch. He left a message. I bought a shovel because it felt like something to do. On my way out, the little black dog pressed his cold nose to my wrist and whined, and I almost told him thank you like he was a person. I didn't sleep that night, and the next night I slept in short, hot fits, like a fever that can't make up its mind. I called my nephew to see if he wanted to drive out there with me, thinking a second set of eyes might reduce the size of the thing. He had the good sense to say no, ma'am, and then the kinder sense to follow with, "I'll come by tomorrow if you want." I told him tomorrow was fine. It was a lie. Tomorrow was the date that had been cut into stone for me. Morning tasted like pennies. I made coffee I didn't drink and put on jeans with deep pockets and slipped my volunteer badge into one of them without thinking. Just habit, the way some people slip a cigarette. The badge is plastic and cracked, and the picture is from back when I had color in my hair. It reads Bethany Hospice, volunteer, and under that my name, which I was not saying out loud at all. The whole drive out, the cicadas sounded like fat rain with no clouds. The honeysuckle had crept another inch overnight. It looked like it would swallow the fence by the end of the week. In the yard, the same heat, the same smell, the same slant of the church roof. The same 2 stones. I can't explain why I did what I did next except to say the feeling in my chest had grown from a stone to the memory of a stone falling. I walked to the second marker, the one with my name, and I knelt. The dirt in front of it had been smoothed, like a hand had patted it quiet. I pressed my palm to the ground. It was cool. I slid my fingers in and felt loam and the slick skins of worms and that sweetness that lives just under rot. And beneath that, a texture like the top of a box or a flat rock. I told myself to stop. I did not. I dug with my hands first, then with the heel of my shoe, And then I remembered the shovel in the trunk and went to get it like a person remembering her keys. If you've never dug in Georgia in August, it is like arguing with an aunt who loves you and will not budge. The earth gives just enough to make you think you're winning. Sweat ran into my eyes. My back told me about itself in new ways. I dug a rectangle the size of a small suitcase. The first few inches go easy. Then you hit roots that have learned the patience of God. Then you hit something packed that remembers the weight of rains older than you. I kept going because once you start a thing like that, stopping is worse. After a foot, the shovel rang in a way that was not rock. It was a careful sound, man-made. I dropped to my knees and scooped the dirt with my hands. A white corner appeared, then a slick. I thought of bones because you do, even if you tell yourself how ridiculous it is, but it wasn't that. I brushed and there it was, my volunteer badge. The plastic was cloudy and scuffed. The clip was bent. The picture was still me. It lay in the earth flat as if set there by someone who wants to remember where they put it. I did what a person does when they find themselves in a story they want to leave. I lifted the badge and held it. My hands were filthy. Dirt had found its way into the creases of my knuckles and under my nails and up my arms where I'd brushed hair out of my eyes. The badge looked small. I had a stupid thought, that I should wipe it on my jeans and put it back in my pocket because that is where it belongs. Instead, I looked around like whoever had put it there might step out from behind a cedar and say, "All right, we had our laugh." No one stepped out. The cicadas were both everywhere and nowhere. The blackberry canes moved a little and I told myself it was a rabbit. I sat back on my heels and tried to breathe slow and my breath came fast anyway. I said my own name out loud and it felt heavy in the mouth. I said, "Who did this?" And the air did not have an answer. I filled the hole in because leaving an open cut in the ground felt rude. There are rules you follow even when the rest of the rules are dissolving. I tamped the dirt with the flat of the shovel. I set the badge on top of the marker like a person who can't decide whether to keep a thing or return it. Then I took it back because I have lost too many things in my life already and the idea of letting go of my own name flattened me. I walked toward the church, dazed, and found the chain on the front door looped but not locked. That felt like a choice someone had made. Inside, the air was close and smelled like damp wood and old hymnals. Dust made the light look solid. Pews sat slow in their rows. A few bulletins were wedged under hymnals the way people leave intentions behind. I stood there and listened to the way the building held itself together. Then I heard it, a scrape, back near the little room where they used to keep coffee urns. It was a friendly sound taken from the wrong place. I said, "Hello?" Because you have to say something. A man stepped out from the hallway like he'd been part of the shadow and only just remembered he used to be a person. He was in his 70s, maybe, with a face that had settled into one expression a long time ago. He wore a deacon's kind of shirt, short sleeves, pocket with a pen, and he held a brush in one hand and a little can of paint in the other. The smell hit me, sharp and familiar. He was painting letters on a board that leaned against the wall. It said, "Homecoming, Sunday, Sep," and then a blank where a date would go. The brush had crisped just a little at the tip from not being washed enough times. "You scared me," I said, and he nodded like he got that a lot. "You Deacon Earl?" I asked, and he nodded again, less like agreement than like permission. "Did you set those stones?" I asked because there was no reason to be polite anymore, and he looked past me like you look at a stain you can't clean. "Been some new ones," he said. "People put their own down now. Don't always go through the church. Times change." "Someone put mine," I said, and the way he looked at me told me I'd made a mistake using that word. Mine. "Name?" he asked. I told him. He nodded again like he was adding a line in an invisible ledger. "So they do," he said. I felt something hot crawl up my neck. "Who?" I said. "Who would do that?" He set the brush across the rim of the can, neat, and closed the lid with his thumb. "Sometimes the ground does," he said. I must have made a face because he added, "Don't look at me that way. You sit with folks. You know how a room knows before a person does." He stepped past me into the light and the dust made a halo around his shoulders. I don't mean that in any religious way. It was just physics and air. "You want me to take it up?" he asked, and his voice was kindly and bored at once like he'd made the offer before. "Yes," I said so quickly I bit my tongue. "Please, take it up. I'll pay what it costs." He nodded. "It won't matter," he said. He said it like he was telling me the time. "But I'll do it if it helps you sleep." He picked up a set of keys and a pry bar leaned behind the door the way a broom would be in an honest building. We walked out together and he did not ask where we were going. He led me to the back corner I could have found in my sleep, and then he stopped 3 paces short and took off his hat the way some men do when they enter a room. I thought of the badge in my pocket, heavy like a stone you could throw and see how far your arm goes. He set the pry bar at the base of the stone and worked it gently like anyone who has ever respected a stubborn thing. The ground didn't fight him much. That was what got me. It lifted like a lid that had been set, not sealed. Beneath the stone, more smooth earth. He frowned in that tiny way the face does when the news isn't good or bad, just new. "You see," he said. I didn't. I saw nothing, and it frightened me more than if I'd seen a hole. We carried the stone. He carried. I just put my hands under the edge like a child being allowed to help, toward the shed where they kept the mower that never ran. He set it inside against the wall like something borrowed and due for return. "You'll put it back?" I asked, because under the practical part of me is a part that likes closure, even if closure is a door to a room you never wanted to go into. "If it's meant," he said, "it don't need me." I drove home with my badge on the passenger seat like a person. At every light I looked at it. At every light it looked back. The date on the stone had been the next day now. They'd carved it in a way you couldn't argue with, all square shoulders and clean edges. I set 2 alarms that night and then I didn't sleep anyway. I left the television on just to listen to voices of people with small problems. I held the badge in my hand until the heat made it curl a little. The next day nobody came for me. I know how that sounds, dramatic in the wrong way. But I had believed for a few hours there that the world had declared itself finished with me. I waited for a pain to tighten, for a siren to fall, for a silence to bloom in my head. Instead, Mrs. Cole knocked to return my loaf pan and tell me her niece was having a baby in October. My nephew texted to say his car wouldn't start. The cats were violent with a cricket under the fridge. Life puttered. Every now and then I would taste honeysuckle like a trick of wind in my kitchen. At sundown I drove back. This is likely the part where you want me to do the sensible thing. Call somebody, call anybody. I had called the one person in this county who kept keys to the places you don't think about, and he had taken my future into a shed and leaned it against a wall like a ladder. I guess I wanted to see if the shed door had stayed closed. Fieldstone looked the same because ruin doesn't hurry. The place where the second stone had been was neat again. The first nameless stone still stood white in the dusk. I walked toward it thinking how stubbornness is a kind of prayer when you don't have any left. As I came close, I noticed someone had set a small object on top of it, like a votive without flame. I reached up. It was a bus token, old style, from the kind the city used 30 years back with a hole punched in the middle. I turned it in my fingers and thought of all the pockets it had warmed before this. I looked down and saw another token pressed into the dirt at the base like someone had pushed it with their thumb. There were other little things too. Once my eyes adjusted, a grocery receipt for milk and bread from a store that closed in 2002. A Polaroid with the faces turned white because the developer had soured, but in the background the shape of a woman's dress you could still name as church clothes. A brass button still threaded to a rag of blue frayed into nothing. And beneath it, if you'll believe me, the imprint of letters in dirt as if someone had set a plaque there and then changed their mind. The ground looked busy, like it had been making a list. Behind me, a car drove past and didn't slow. The cicadas hit their top note. I felt watched the way I had that first night, but not by eyes. By the kind of attention a place gives when it finally recognizes you. I think I might have spoken. I think I might have said, "All right, I'm not brave. I'm just tired, and tired people finish the things they start." There were days after that. I am here to tell you that I am here and I am not wearing any special luck. I called Deacon Earl once more. He didn't pick up. I went to the hardware store. The dog put his nose on my wrist again. Mr. Cleveland said, "How's your friend?" And it took me a second to know he meant Eunice. I said she was quiet, and he nodded like he understood a better answer that I couldn't give. I sat with a woman at Bethany who wanted me to sing Rock of Ages, even though my voice is not a gift. I sang anyway, and she cried and said, "That's all right," and I believe she meant me. I haven't been back to Fieldstone in a few months. I don't think the dead mind who visits. The living do the minding. I keep the badge on my kitchen table now, on top of the pile of mail I don't open on time. Sometimes when I pass, it catches my eye and I feel that little sting like I've put my hand on a stove to test whether it's still hot. The day carved on the stone for me came and went without taking me, and then there was another day and another. I don't say I'm safe. I say I've been noticed. If you want advice from a woman who has counted other people's breaths, don't go measuring yourself against stones. They'll always come out ahead. They've got patience you can't practice. I don't visit cemeteries much anymore. I bring my flowers to porches. I sit with my people while they're still in their chairs. When folks ask why, I say I feel pre-reserved, like a table with the little name card already set. And when I get the urge to drive out County Road 12 and listen to the cicadas burn, I remind myself of something I heard a man say in a church that didn't want me. The ground knows before we do. Sometimes, late, when the house is quiet and the refrigerator ticks and the cats are dreaming heavy, I smell honeysuckle from a window I'm sure I closed. I don't get up. I let it move through the rooms like someone looking for where to set a bag down. I think about the nameless stone and all the small offerings and the way a place can keep a tally without ink. I think about the badge and the dirt and the careful hand that put it there, and whether it was a human hand or just the way the earth arranges itself around what it intends to hold. I think about Eunice saying she wanted a place that could swallow her up if she wasn't careful, and how she always said it like a joke that had already picked its punchline. I am not telling you this so you'll pray for me, or so you'll stop visiting the people you love. I'm telling you because I used to believe in the comfort of straight lines, of hospital monitors that go soft at the end, of paperwork that closes a life into a file folder, of dates that tell you where to stand. There are places where those lines don't hold. There are corners where the air keeps its own calendar. If you find yourself in one, back away if you can. If you can't, listen. The Fieldstone grave in Barrow County is still there, and the church roof still smiles its crooked smile. And the cicadas still say what they've always said, that time is a sound, and some of us are already being called by it, that's all. I've said more than I meant to. If you ever pass Fieldstone, don't bother looking for my name. It's not out where you can see it anymore, but that doesn't mean it's not there. My name is Henry Calhoun. I'm 29, I live in Queens, and until this happened, I was one of those guys who sneaks into places with a flashlight and a camera, and calls it urban exploration, like it's a profession. I'm not an influencer exactly. I had a small channel, a scrappy blog, and a stubborn, stupid streak that made me chase things other people shrugged off as ghost stories. If it looked abandoned, if it smelled wrong, if someone told me not to go. That was a checklist, not a warning. If you're from New York, you've probably heard of Dead Horse Bay. It's that weird strip of shoreline near Floyd Bennett Field where, at low tide, glass bottles and pieces of old shoes and rusted metal rise out of the sand. People pick through it. Some call it a landfill. Others call it a time capsule. It's both. The place smells like salt and rotten glue. It smells like the bottom of a history book left in a puddle. Last fall in late October, a storm tore through and pulled a new scar in the beach. There were posts on RNYC. Someone said pieces of coffins were washing up. Someone else said they saw a child's skull. Nothing verified, but that didn't stop anyone. The comments were loaded with "don't go" and "you'll get sick." And then every other comment said where to park and when the tide was lowest. I went because of a DM from another explorer, a guy named Rob I bumped into once under the Kosciuszko Bridge. He said, "Henry, they're finding bones at Dead Horse Bay. If you want to hit, find them before the news does." I told him I didn't chase graves, not even for views. He sent me a screenshot of a Craigslist listing. Found bones at Dead Horse Bay, pay to return. It looked like a troll, but it got under my skin. The storm had hit Friday. If I went Sunday before sunrise, I could get the place mostly to myself. My friend Mara came with me to shoot B-roll. She's tiny, red hoodie, tough as steel. The kind of person who will roll her eyes while she hands you the spare battery. We parked near the old airfield and walked in under a fading moon. The air was clean up by the road, then sour and sweet by the waterline. It was quiet except for the click of glass in the tide, and the hiss of little waves pushing their way through trash. A man with a metal detector swung a circle in front of him like he was slicing invisible grass. Farther down the beach, a couple hunched under headlamps, picking through bottles. "I can't believe people bring kids here," Mara said, stepping around a tangle of cables like dead snakes. "This place smells like a teeth cleaning." I laughed at that because I could feel it too. The salt hitting the back of my mouth, this strange ache along the gum line. It wasn't painful, just a pressure, like someone pressing a fingertip between my teeth. I thought it was the cold. We followed the new cut in the beach where the storm had dug a trench. Pieces of wood jutted out like ribs. I kept the camera low, getting those slow, creeping shots I like. Shards of blue bottle, a stiff shoe sole, a dead horseshoe crab like a folded helmet. At the edge of the trench, something caught a strip of weak morning light and flashed. It was a tooth. A human tooth, small and perfect, clean like it had been scrubbed. It lay half-pressed in the wet sand with a tiny bit of smooth root showing. I'm not a dentist, but I know what a molar looks like. This one didn't have stains or chips. It looked new. I lifted it without thinking. It was cool and slick, like a pebble from a stream. I said, "Well, that's something," and held it up for Mara's lens. She didn't say, "That's messed up," the way I expected. She didn't say anything at all. She just steadied the camera and zoomed in. There's this weird moment you get sometimes filming, where your brain splits. One part of you is witnessing the thing and the other part is planning your cold open. I was already drafting it in my head. We found a human tooth at Dead Horse Bay. And then things got strange. We bagged the tooth like we were on a TV show and kept shooting. The beach felt louder even though nothing had changed, just the slap and fizz of water and the wind banging somewhere loose in the grasses. I got a bit of local color with the metal detector guy, who said his name was Sal and who had been coming here since 1978. He was the kind of old you can't quite place. His face was leathered, but his voice sounded young when he said, "You find anything better than a subway token?" "Just a tooth," I said. "Is that normal here?" He frowned. "Animal?" "Human. You didn't keep it, did you?" I patted the pocket where the bag sat. "For the thumbnail." He shook his head and looked out at the water. "People put things back here," he said, like it meant something. Then he went back to sweeping his circle. I got enough footage for a tight 8-minute cut. The tooth, the trench, some history bits, a shot of me talking about how the city used to toss horse carcasses out here, how that's supposedly how it got the name. We left when the tide started sliding back in and the bottles began to rattle like spoons in a drawer. That night I dumped the cards and started the edit. The raw files opened fine. The audio sounded crisp, but when I pulled everything into Premiere, half the clips read as corrupted. I tried to relink. The files disappeared one by one. It was like watching sand drain through a glass funnel. One second they were there, the next there was a red media offline bar. I checked my external. I checked the local copy. I checked the cloud backup. Every time I opened a folder, another file blinked out. I stared at the screen long enough that my own reflection started to feel like someone standing behind me. I called Mara. "Did you back up the footage?" She paused. "Yeah, on my drive. Can you check?" She put me on speaker and moved around in that way you can hear. Drawers and a zipper. "Weird," she said. "It keeps kicking me out of the folder." She made a confused noise. My mic files are still there though. Send me those?" She did. I listened to them while the render bar crawled across empty gaps. Her external mic had been on the whole time, catching little redundancies. Me clearing my throat, instructions, wind notes. Also something else. At first I thought it was the ocean. But this was slower, closer, wet. It sounded like someone standing beside us and trying not to breathe too loudly. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there with my mouth tasting like a coin, going back and forth between it's nothing and it's something. I told myself it was the wind hitting the mic shield. I told myself the files were a glitch. The tooth was the only thing that didn't feel like a coincidence, and even that had 1,000 logical explanations. Dead Horse Bay spits out all kinds of weird. A tooth's not impossible. The next morning, I put the tooth on my desk and took a picture of it for the blog. The caption said, "Found at Dead Horse Bay. Anyone know if this could be modern?" The first comment came from a user named Municipal Archivist who said, "Bag it, tag it, bring it back." The second was a DM from Rob. "You sure you want to post that? People are going to call the cops." "I didn't steal a skull," I wrote back. "It's a tooth." He sent me a skull emoji and didn't reply. By afternoon, I'd talked myself into going back. The footage was screwed. The tooth made a weak story. But if I could find proof of a disturbed burial, just proof, not bones, I could cut a piece strong enough to pitch to one of the bigger channels. I told myself I was documenting a public hazard. I told myself I'd call someone if I found anything real. Mara didn't pick up, so I went alone, which, yes, bad idea. The wind had switched, pushing the brine smell straight into my face from the parking lot. My gums tingled like I'd drunk a Slurpee too fast. When I stepped from the grass onto the sand, I felt my shoes sink. The kind of sink where you know if you stop moving, you'll go deeper. The tide had dropped lower than the day before. The trench was larger. The wet sand glowed like cold oil. There was a tooth in the same place where I'd found the first one. I mean the exact same place. Pressed at the same angle with the same sliver of root. I had bagged the first one. I had put it on my desk. This was a second one, identical. I looked around for a prankster, some teen with a pocket of plastic, but it wasn't a prop. It had the faint translucent look of enamel and the weight of bone. My theory motor coughed and stalled. I picked it up and a chill rose from the sand through the soles of my shoes like the beach had drawn a breath. I backed away. I filmed it, close in and then wide, all the while narrating like I was trying to convince both of us. Okay, Dead Horse Bay, unbelievable déjà vu. Same tooth. Is someone messing with us? My voice sounded too loud. I looked down the beach. Sal wasn't there. The couple with headlamps weren't there. The metal detector guy had left a groove in a set of tracks that came and went into the water, like he'd been erasing himself as he walked. On the way out, I ran into a park ranger near the lot. She was tall, Irish last name on her tag, O'Donnell, with eyes that didn't miss much. She asked if I'd been down to the water and I said yes. She asked me if I'd seen anything unusual. I told her I'd found some teeth. She pursed her lips and said, "You didn't take them, did you? Should I turn them in? Just leave anything that looks like it should be left." She said it politely, but there was a warning inside the politeness. There are old burial sites all along this coast. Indigenous, colonial, early municipal. It's complicated. The tides move things. Are there human remains under there? I asked. She looked past me toward the beach where the light lay flat like a sheet of tin. There are remains under everywhere, she said. This is New York. I didn't show her the bag. I don't know why. Maybe embarrassment. Maybe I didn't want to give it up because at that point the tooth felt like proof that I wasn't losing it. That night I tried to edit again. The second day's footage loaded and then began to vanish, same as before. I moved what I could to a different drive. Gone. I tried to screen record the timeline window as it cleared. The screen recorder captured my mouse drifting across empty gray. When I played the audio, Mara's external hadn't been there, so it was just my camera mic. I heard the breathing again, huddled at the edge of the surf sound. It had a rhythm, like two short pulls and a long one with a little catch in the long exhale. Listening to it made my gums ache so sharply I had to press my tongue against my teeth. I told myself I'd go one more time, at night, at the very bottom of the tide. If the trench was laying stuff bare, I ran the odds in my head and convinced myself there had to be a source. Maybe someone dumped a whole jar of pulled teeth. There are weirder things at beaches. Or maybe there really was a burial. If there was, the right thing to do was document it and turn it over to the city. I didn't ask Mara to come. I loaded a shovel into the trunk and felt ridiculous, like I was about to be the idiot in a cautionary video. I brought 2 lights, fresh batteries, the good mic, new cards. My phone was at 100%. I texted my sister, "Going to Dead Horse Bay, back by midnight." She sent me a pizza emoji. I didn't respond. I parked and walked in. The lot smelled like sea and old leather. The wind pushed my hood back twice, like fingers flattening a cowlick. The beach was empty. From the road, it looks industrial and open. But down on the sand at night, it feels like you've stepped into a long mouth. The old pier pilings stick out like missing teeth. The bottles clack and knock together. The darkness is oily, reflective. Every light you bring bounces back wrong. I set the tripod on the lip of the trench and aimed the camera down. I let the mic dangle low just above the sand to pick up whatever texture I could. I clicked on my headlamp and took out the shovel. I started where I'd found the teeth, careful, skimming off thin slices of sand and slush like cutting into a cake. The shovel clinked on glass, tapped wood, dragged across a wire. The smell rose around me like someone had opened a sealed box of wet wool and fish scales. My gum ache spread to my jaw hinge. I could feel my own molars, each separate, their little roots anchored in a memory of pain. About 6 inches down, the shovel stopped like it had hit a plank. I cleared around it with my hands. It wasn't wood. It was something smooth and curved, slick as if someone had pumped it full of lotion. For a second I thought, modern plastic. But my fingers recognized the shape before my brain did. It was the arc of a jaw, I froze, half-crouched, hands black with sand and filth. A part of me said, "Stop, stop, stop." Another part said, "You're already here." I used my fingers, not the shovel, and brushed along the curve. The jaw wasn't hard. It had a spring to it. The skin over my knuckles crawled. Bone isn't supposed to bend. It felt like cartilage that had been soaked in brine, a flexible, preserved thing. I pressed a little to see if I was imagining it, and it gave, then seemed to press back. My headlamp flickered. My breath came fast and sounded too loud. I thought of Sal saying, "People put things back here." The trench made a soft, settling noise. I touched the line where teeth should have been and found the empty sockets, neat as a row of buttons. There was a slosh, and the water in the trench lifted an inch as if something had shifted below. The mic on the camera, which I had forgotten was rolling, caught something that would later make my skin go cold even just thinking about it. A breath that wasn't mine. 2 short pulls, then a long one with a catch. I whispered, "Hello?" Because that's what idiots in stories do. The jaw under my hand felt warmer. It shouldn't have been warm. A shape emerged in my headlight, not an object, more a boundary like the line of a face. The sand had those weird slick patches you get near water, and on it I saw a smooth curve, a cheek that never dried, spongy from the salt. I saw a lip. I swear I saw a lip. When my light brushed it, it shone like a seal's back, not glossy, wet. Then, from somewhere behind me, a man coughed. I jerked around so fast the world smeared. My headlamp swung across the beach and hit pilings, bottles, a bent shopping cart, nothing. Then closer, a different sound, the metal detector warble. Not from a machine, but from someone imitating it in their throat. It rose and fell, and stupid as it sounds, I thought, Sal? But it didn't sound like Sal. It sounded like someone mocking him. My camera toppled. The mic thumped the sand. I went to grab it, and my fingers slid into the trench up to the wrist. The sand around the jawline had gone soft, fluid. It sucked at my skin. It was the most disgusting thing I have ever felt. Not because it was slimy, but because it clung like a mouth closing around a finger to bite. Not hard, not yet. Just enough to hold. To test, I yanked back and left my glove behind. The glove vanished, swallowed with a patient, horrible motion. My headlamp showed ripples moving away from the spot, like something had exhaled below and the water was spending it. I didn't throw the shovel. I didn't scream. I grabbed the camera by the strap and ran. Halfway to the car, I heard footsteps behind me, keeping pace. Not hurried like someone with a walking habit, not there. Then suddenly there in the spaces between my own steps. I didn't look back. When I reached the lot, I did the fumbling rituals of fear. Wrong key, wrong door, dropped the seat, hand shaking so bad I hit the hazard lights. I watched the beach while the engine turned over. Nothing came out of the dark. Nothing waved. But the smell of salt and rot poured in through the vents, and the pressure in my mouth climbed until I thought my teeth would crack. I got home and sat in the tub in my clothes. I peeled off the remaining glove and saw that the tips of my fingers were pale and wrinkled and, in 3 places, roughened like callus. The ache in my gums rolled in steady waves. I spit. The spit was clear, bubbly, like my mouth thought it was in salt water. I set the camera on the counter and dared myself to look. The files were there. I copied them to my computer and watched my hand reach into the trench. I watched the headlamp flicker and the mic catch that breath. I scrubbed frame by frame through the part where the jaw flexed. When I paused, there was nothing to circle with a red arrow. The footage wasn't Hollywood. It was just wet sand and a pattern that could have been coincidence. Could have been my brain trying to map a face onto chaos. I uploaded a draft to my private channel to get Mara's thoughts. The upload failed at 99%. It failed again. On the 3rd try, the progress bar hit 100, the screen flashed white, and the file name changed by itself to a string of numbers. 0, draw, move. Then it vanished. The folder auto-closed. The drive ejected. The icon hovered, then disappeared as if dragged off the desktop by an invisible cursor. I posted a shaky, 1-paragraph update to the blog. Storms pulled out something strange at Dead Horse Bay, found 2 identical teeth the same place. Audio picked up breathing. Tonight I almost found more. I'm going to stop for now. I got 24 messages in an hour. Some were jokes. Some were warnings. One was from municipal archivist. We told you to bring it back. Back what? The first tooth? The one on my desk? I went to get it. It wasn't on my desk. It wasn't in the bag. The Ziploc lay flat. The little label I'd scribbled, DHB tooth number 1, looked ridiculous. The second bag was there, sealed with the second tooth sitting neatly inside like a piece of candy. I opened the bag and turned it into my palm. It was warm. Not body temperature warm, breath on glass warm. When I held it up to the light, the enamel looked wet, not shiny. Wet, my gums throbbed. I put the tooth down, rinsed my mouth, and called Mara. This time she answered on the second ring and said, "I was about to call you." My mic recorded something. Do you want me to send it?" "I heard breathing," I said. She exhaled. "Yeah." Then more quietly, "Something else too." She texted me a file. I used headphones. The surf was there, a soft hush. The wind clicked in the grill. Under it, the breath pattern, 2 shorts, 1 long catch. Then a whisper. I couldn't make out words until I replayed it 5 times with the volume all the way up. Even then, I'm not confident. It sounded like, "Put them back in." I felt my hands sweat even more than they already were. "What do you mean, them?" I asked the empty room like the mic could hear me. "Teeth? Whose?" I shouldn't have gone again, but of course I did, in daylight with Mara. We didn't have to talk each other into it. We didn't talk much at all. She kept saying her mouth felt fuzzy. We brought gloves. We brought no shovel. When we got to the beach, the ranger, O'Donnell, stood near the path with 2 other rangers. They had that look of people who have had this conversation 100 times. "Please stay out of the cut. Please don't collect anything. The site is unstable." I said, "Of course," like a liar. O'Donnell gave me a look I couldn't read. She said, "Tides are tricky. They give and they take. Watch your feet." We went to the same spot. There was another tooth there waiting like a polite dog. Mara didn't even bend to pick it up. She just filmed it. I held the second bag up to compare and realized I'd left the tooth on my counter. I had nothing to bring back, nothing to put in. I placed the empty bag in the sand anyway and felt ridiculous and also stupidly relieved. Like maybe it was the gesture that mattered. A kid down the beach started crying, that sudden pop of noise all parents know. It echoed. His mother said, "Shh, shh," and his crying cut off like someone had pressed stop. I looked up. The kid stood very still, 1 hand on his cheek, and then he stuck his fingers into his mouth like he was checking for loose teeth. He looked our way and started to walk, slow, zombie-like. His mom called. He kept coming. It took me a second to realize he wasn't looking at us. He was looking past us at the trench. I said, "Let's go." Mara didn't move. She had her headphones on, listening as she monitored the mic. She made a face, a disgusted one, and pulled the headphones off. "It's louder today," she said. "Close. We didn't put anything back that day. We didn't get anything usable either." On the way out, O'Donnell stopped us and said, "If you found anything that looks human, you need to tell us, and you need to leave it." She said it in a soft voice that made it worse. "I found a tooth," I said. 2, actually. "I don't know if they—" "You took them," she said, not a question. I couldn't make my mouth say the word yes, but apparently my face said it for me. She looked tired. "Please put them back," she said, "even if it's just the idea of them." That night, my footage deleted itself before I even got it off the card. The files winked in and out, little tombstones with X's where thumbnails should be. The file names went blank, and then the empty names went blank too, if that makes sense. Like the system forgot there had ever been a name. I sat there watching the drive, and a numbness came into my jaw so hard I couldn't speak if I'd wanted to. I went to the sink and spit. There was a thin thread in it, not blood, not anything I want to think about too much. It tasted like cold soup. I decided to take the second tooth back. The first was gone. I tore apart my apartment. I checked pockets, bags, the crack behind the bookshelf where a card once fell. Nothing. The second tooth was on the counter where I'd left it. Soft, warm to the touch, the way a stone is warm if it's been sitting in a shallow stream in the sun. I put it in the bag in my pocket and drove. This time, the lot was almost full. Word had gotten out. People walked in with tote bags and gloves like they were going berry picking. A guy in a Yankees cap carried a bucket that said Homer. The smell met me at the curb, salt and lilies and something like old bandages. My mouth throbbed. I walked down to the trench. There were kids there again, 2 crouching and poking at what might have been a bit of wooden beam. Their dad filmed them with his phone. "Careful," he said. "Don't touch any needles." The trench went deeper than before. The sand wall showed layers like a cake, dark silt, lighter, a stripe of broken glass that glittered even in shade. I stood where I'd stood and waited for a sign. It came. The water's edge thickened the way it does when a wave pulls back. The sand in front of me slumped and then filled like a chest rising on an inhale. I put the bag on the sand, opened it, and tipped the tooth in. It fell out and landed enamel down like it wanted to hide. The sand around it sighed, the only word I have for it, and smoothed itself over the bag in a thin skin. I stepped back. My camera in my hand was dead, not out of battery. Dead like a stone. The screen was black, but in the black I saw a faint, pale reflection of my face. For a heartbeat, my face had more teeth than it should. I blinked and it was normal again. "Move back," a voice said. "O'Donnell." She stepped between me and the trench, one hand out to keep me from slipping. "Storm's turning," she said. "It takes what it can get." I nodded like I understood. I did not. That night my breath sounded different when I lay down, like it had a catch in it. I tried to put it out of my mind. I tried to think about email subject lines and thumbnail fonts. I tried to think about anything else. I dreamed about rivers under sand, the way water moves under a crust, feeling its way around to find the path of least resistance. The next morning, the first tooth was back on my desk. It sat right there on the corner, exactly where I'd put it the first time, except this time it had a hairline crack running down one side. It moved when I breathed near it. I swear it did. It rocked like something with a tiny pulse. I stopped posting. People asked where I'd gone. Rob messaged twice, then once more. "Hey man, if this is a bit, say so." It wasn't a bit. My footage would not stay where I put it, and when I tried to tell the story without footage, the words crawled backwards and deleted themselves. I don't mean that figuratively. I mean, I watched my text cursor tremble and then backspace through paragraphs I hadn't told it to erase. I tried paper. The ink bled, the page got damp, and when I touched it to check, my finger came away tasteless and wet. If you've ever tried to remember a dream the second you wake up and felt it slide away even as you speak it, like that, but on purpose. Like I wasn't meant to keep this in a form I could show you. So I'm saying it here in my own voice as plainly as I can, because I don't think I'm the only one who took something from that beach, and because maybe if I say it, it will stay said. Dead Horse Bay looks dead. It's not. Under that glass and wood and old shoes, there's something conserved, something the salt cured, something that isn't done being a body. I think they cut a trench straight down into a pocket where a face lay pressed into black sand, and brine might as well have been embalming fluid. I think the water swells in that pocket when the tide pulls out, like a lung drawn slow, and I think it tries to breathe through whatever openings it can find. What it can pull in, it does. What it can push out, it sends in pieces to see who will bring them home. I kept one of those pieces, maybe two, depending on how you do the math. The first tooth left and came back with a complaint written down its enamel. The second one is buried in a Ziploc bag under the place where the trench used to be. I never saw it again after that day. But sometimes when I sleep, I hear the metal detector warble in my hallway, and I wake up with the taste of cold salt in my mouth and the feeling that someone is standing by my bed. Breathing very gently, trying not to be heard, I stopped uploading. I tell people I'm taking a break from the channel because the algorithm is trash or because I'm focusing on freelance work, and that's partly true. The actual truth is I can't stand the sound of my own breath on a mic. It isn't mine all the way anymore. There's a catch at the end of the inhale that doesn't belong to me. When I pass a bodega with a bucket of iced oysters out front, my gums ache. When it rains and the city gutters swell, the ache turns to pressure and I have to sit down somewhere and press my tongue against my teeth until it passes. I don't go to beaches. I don't go near that part of Flatbush. The smell of salt makes me dizzy and weirdly hungry, like my mouth remembers something it's never eaten. Sometimes when I floss, the thread catches on something that isn't there, and the mirror fogs from a breath that isn't mine. I want to tell you that I'm going to take the first tooth back. I want to tell you I'm brave enough to do that. But here is the worst part of this story. The part that makes even me roll my eyes at myself. I can't. The tooth won't leave my apartment anymore. I put it in my pocket and go to the door and my hand won't turn the knob. My body stands there like it's a polite guest waiting for its host to say goodnight. When I walk away, I can feel the tooth pull at me from the other room like a magnet. When I go to pick it up again, it's warm. If you're reading this because you search for Dead Horse Bay on purpose, because you think you'll be smarter than me and you'll bring gloves and you'll leave things where they lay, good. Do that. If you pick up a tooth, even just to joke, even just to show your friend, put it back with both hands and don't talk to it while you do. Don't bring it home to put on your desk and take a picture. Don't try to be the one who found a body by accident. Don't bring breath to a place that already has trouble breathing. I still get DMs sometimes from people who know me as the guy who climbs into places that smell wrong. They say, "When's the next upload?" Here's the upload. Maybe it won't stick on my channel. Maybe it'll vanish from your inbox. But you'll know it if you hear it without headphones in a quiet room, next to a half bowl of brackish water and a window cracked open to the sound of cars hissing on wet pavement. It's the sound of the ocean trying to catch its breath after the city has leaned on its chest for 100 years. And if you ever go down there at low tide and the trench has cut open again, and you feel that ache in your gums like a memory, and you see a single perfect tooth lying half pressed in the sand at exactly the place where I found one, don't think you're the first. Don't think you're the last. Don't think it's a prank or a miracle. Put it back. Smooth the sand. Say you're sorry, because there is something under there that still remembers being alive, and it wants you to remember it too.